Pay $3,000 in rent or find another place to live, Ethan. My daughter-in-law Brittany slammed the utility bill onto the quartz countertop so hard the crystal wine glasses trembled. I looked across the table at my son Tyrell, waiting for him to defend me, to say that this was madness. He just stared at his plate, unable to meet my eyes. I smiled a slow, cold smile that they did not understand. They thought they were evicting a helpless old man. They did not know that by Friday morning a black Lincoln would pull up to the curb and my son would finally learn who his father really was. Before I tell you how I destroyed their world with a single signature, please like and subscribe to support more stories of justice. The silence in the dining room was not peaceful. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of a storm waiting to break. The only sound was the metallic scrape of silver forks against fine china plates. I sat at the far end of the table trying to eat my roast chicken with as much dignity as a 71-year-old man could muster. My hands trembled slightly, not from age but from a lifetime of hard labor. These hands had steered 18-wheelers through blizzards in Montana and changed tires in the scorching heat of Texas. They were rough, calloused, and permanently stained with the ghost of engine grease. I caught Brittany watching my hands. Her upper lip curled in a sneer of undisguised disgust. She sat there in her designer silk blouse, picking at her salad like a queen forced to dine with a peasant. She did not look at me as a father-in-law or even as a human being. She looked at me as a stain on her perfect, pristine life, a stain she was desperate to scrub away. Tyrell sat between us. My son, the boy I had worked double shifts for so he could have braces, the young man I had sent to private school so he would never have to sweat under a hood like I did. Now he was a man of 40 wearing a suit that cost more than my first car, yet he looked smaller than he ever had as a child. He kept his head down, focused entirely on cutting his meat as if the secrets of the universe were hidden in the poultry. He knew what was coming. I could see it in the sweat beading on his forehead. Brittany cleared her throat. It was a sharp, aggressive sound. She reached for the bottle of wine and poured herself a glass, not offering any to me. "Ethan," she said, dropping the title of Dad or Mr. Carter entirely. "We need to talk about your living arrangements." I placed my fork down gently. I looked around the room. The open concept kitchen, the vaulted ceilings, the hardwood floors. It was a beautiful house. A house in an upscale Atlanta suburb, where the neighbors drove Teslas and the lawns were manicured with scissors. I remembered the day I signed the check for the down payment. I remembered handing it to Tyrell, telling him it was a wedding gift. I had wanted him to have the start in life I never had. Now that very gift was being used as a weapon against me. "What about them?" I asked, my voice raspy and deep. "You are costing us too much money," she said bluntly. She reached into her purse and pulled out a stack of papers, throwing them onto the table. They slid across the polished wood and stopped right in front of my plate. "Look at this," she demanded. "The electric bill has gone up 20% since you moved into the basement. The water bill is up. The grocery bill is astronomical. You are home all day, sitting around watching television, eating our food, using our heat. It is not sustainable." I looked at the papers without touching them. I occupied a single room in the finished basement. I kept the lights off until it was pitch black outside. I showered for 3 minutes. I ate leftovers. The idea that I was the cause of their financial strain was laughable, especially considering the Amazon packages that arrived daily for Brittany. "I give you my entire pension check every month," I said calmly. $1,200. $1,200? Brittany laughed, a cruel, high-pitched sound that grated on my nerves. $1,200 does not even cover the mortgage, Ethan. This is Buckhead, not some ghetto apartment complex. You are living in $1 million home. Do you have any idea what the market rent is for a studio in this zip code?" She leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. "We have discussed it, and we have made a decision. We are turning the basement into an Airbnb rental. We can easily get $3,000 a month for that space. So you have two choices. Match that price or find somewhere else to live." The words hung in the air, heavy and toxic. $3,000. She knew my pension was $1,200. She knew I had supposedly zero savings. She was not asking for rent. She was serving an eviction notice wrapped in a demand she knew I could not meet. I looked at Tyrell. This was the moment. This was the moment the son I raised would slam his fist on the table. He would tell his wife that his father was not a tenant, that his father was the patriarch of this family. I waited. The seconds ticked by, agonizingly slow. Tyrell took a long sip of wine. He finally looked up, but he looked past me at the wall behind my head. "Babe makes a good point, Dad," he muttered, his voice weak and devoid of conviction. "We are really struggling right now. The economy is tough. You know I have not gotten that promotion yet. We have to maximize our assets. It is just business. Just business." The phrase cut deeper than any knife. I had built an empire on business. I knew business better than he ever would. But family was never business. Family was the reason you did business. "Tyrell," I said, my voice low, "I bought this house." Technically, Brittany cut in her voice sharp as a razor. Technically, the deed is in Tyrell's name. And since we are married, it is our house. What you gave was a gift. Gifts do not come with lifetime occupancy rights, unless you have a contract stating otherwise. She smiled, then a triumphant smirk. She thought she had me cornered. She thought I was just a senile old truck driver who didn't understand how property law worked. She saw my old flannel shirt and my worn-out work boots and assumed my mind was as tattered as my clothes. "So what is it going to be, Ethan?" she pressed, checking her manicured fingernails. "Can you pay the $3,000? I looked at her. Really looked at her. I saw the greed in her eyes. It wasn't just about the money. She hated my presence. She hated that a black man with rough hands and a slow way of talking was living in her pristine white suburban fantasy. She wanted to erase me. She wanted to sanitize her life. And Tyrell, my disappointed son, was letting her do it. He was choosing his comfort over his conscience. He was choosing the easy path of submission to a tyrant rather than the hard path of loyalty. The hurt flared in my chest, hot and blinding. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell them right then and there that I could buy this entire neighborhood without checking my bank balance. I wanted to tell them that Carter Logistics, the trucking company Tyrell had been rejected from 3 times, was mine. That I owned 500 trucks rolling across America at this very second. But I swallowed the rage. I pushed it down deep into the pit of my stomach where I kept all my secrets. If I told them now, they would just apologize. They would weep fake tears and say they were stressed. They would try to get their hands on the fortune they had just tried to kick out the door. No, they needed to learn. They needed to feel the cold, hard consequences of their greed. I picked up my napkin and wiped my mouth slowly, deliberately. I stood up from the table, my knees popping in the silence. I looked down at the dinner I hadn't finished. Wasteful, I thought, just like them. "Very well," I said. My voice was steady, showing none of the heartbreak that was tearing me apart inside. "Very well, what?" Brittany snapped. "You will pay." "I will pay," I said. "I will have the money for you by the 1st of the month." Brittany blinked, surprised by my easy capitulation. She had expected a fight. She had wanted a fight so she could call the police and have me removed for being aggressive. My compliance threw her off balance, but only for a second. "Good," she sniffed. "See, Tyrell, I told you he was holding out on us. He probably has a stash of cash hidden in that mattress of his." She stood up and began clearing the table, snatching my plate away before I could say another word. "And Ethan," she added her back to me, "since you are now officially a tenant paying market rate, do not think you can roam around the main house anymore. The kitchen and living room are for family. You have a kitchenette in the basement. Use it. We do not want to see you upstairs, unless invited." I looked at Tyrell one last time. He was pouring himself another glass of wine, his hand shaking so much the bottle rattled against the rim. He was drowning his guilt, but guilt was a poor substitute for a spine. I turned and walked to the basement door. It was a heavy, solid wood door that they kept closed to hide me from their guests. I opened it and descended into the dark. The basement was cold. It smelled of damp earth and unwashed laundry. The furniture down here was the cast-offs from the main house. A sofa with a broken spring, a table with scratches on it. This was my kingdom. This was where the man who built a $100 million logistics empire laid his head. I sat on the edge of the twin mattress. I reached under the bed and pulled out an old, battered toolbox. It looked like junk, something filled with rusty wrenches and screwdrivers. I opened it. Inside, nestled in the velvet lining where the tools should have been, was a sleek encrypted satellite phone and a black leather notebook. I picked up the phone. It was heavy, dense with technology. I dialed a number I knew by heart. It rang once. "Solomon here." A deep, crisp voice answered immediately. "It is time," I said. Mr. Carter's Solomon voice shifted from professional to alert. "Has something happened?" "They demanded rent," I said, staring at the concrete wall of my basement prison. $3,000. And they have restricted my access to the house. There was a pause on the other line, a heavy, pregnant pause. Solomon knew what this meant. He had been my attorney for 30 years. He knew the terms of the trust. He knew the specific clauses we had written into the ownership agreements of every asset I had placed in Tyrell's name. "Are you sure Reginald Solomon?" asked, using my middle name, the one only my oldest friends used. "Once we start this domino effect, there is no stopping it. It will scorch the earth." I thought about Brittany's sneer. I thought about Tyrell's silence. I thought about the cold indifference with which they were ready to throw me onto the street. I am sure I said, my voice hard as iron, "Execute Clause 13. Initiate the asset freeze." And Solomon, "Yes, sir. Prepare the Lincoln. Come get me on Friday morning. I want to inspect the headquarters. It is time the chairman returned to work." "Understood, sir. Friday morning." I ended the call and placed the phone back in the toolbox. I lay back on the lumpy mattress and stared at the ceiling, listening to the footsteps of my son and his wife above me. They were walking on floors I paid for, under a roof I provided, planning how to spend the money they were going to extort from me. They thought they had won. They thought they had squeezed the last drop of value out of a dying lemon. They had no idea that they had just pulled the pin on a grenade and were holding it tight against their chests, waiting for the boom. I closed my eyes, but I did not sleep. I waited. The countdown had begun. The rain in Atlanta that evening was not a cleansing shower. It was a cold, biting drizzle that seeped right through my old wool coat and settled into my bones. I had walked the 6 blocks from the bus stop, my head down against the wind, clutching a plastic bag of groceries I had bought with my own pension money. I could have called a driver. I could have summoned a heated SUV with a single text message to Solomon, but I did not. I was playing a part. I was Ethan, the retired truck driver who lived in his son's basement. And retired truck drivers did not have private chauffeurs. They walked in the rain. My joints ached with every step. It was the kind of damp cold that reminded me of my age, that whispered to me that I was 71 years old and tired. But as I turned the corner onto the street where my son lived, the street where I had bought the house that was supposed to be my sanctuary, my fatigue vanished. It was replaced by a sharp, sudden shock that stopped me dead in my tracks. There, under the harsh yellow glow of the street lamp, sat a splash of deep crimson velvet. It was soaking wet, the fabric darkened by the rain, but I knew it instantly. It was the Queen Anne armchair, Beatrice's chair. My breath caught in my throat. That chair was not just a piece of furniture. It was the first expensive thing I had ever bought for my wife. I had purchased it in 1985 with the bonus check from my first major logistics contract. Beatrice used to sit in that chair every Sunday evening reading her Bible while the smell of her peach cobbler filled the house. That chair held the shape of her body. It held the faint, lingering scent of her lavender perfume. It was the only thing I had asked to keep in the living room when I moved in. And now it was sitting on the curb next to the overflowing recycling bins and black plastic garbage bags. I dropped my grocery bag. The carton of milk burst on the pavement, leaking white into the gutter, but I did not care. I ran toward the chair, my heavy boots splashing through puddles. My hands shook as I reached out to touch the wet velvet. It was ruined. The water had already soaked through to the cushion. No. I whispered the word into the rain. No. I grabbed the heavy wooden frame and tried to lift it. It was waterlogged and incredibly heavy, heavier than I remembered. I grunted, straining my back, my feet slipping on the wet asphalt. I had to get it inside. If I could get it to the basement, maybe I could dry it out. Maybe I could save it. I dragged it inch by inch up the driveway. My breath came in ragged gasps. I was halfway to the porch when the front door swung open. Brittany stood there, framed by the warm golden light of the foyer. She was wearing a white cashmere sweater and holding a cup of tea, looking down at me with an expression of pure disdain. "What do you think you are doing, Ethan?" she asked, her voice cutting through the sound of the rain. I stopped, my chest heaving. I looked up at her, water dripping from the brim of my hat onto my face. "It is Beatrice's chair," I said, my voice hoarse. "Why is it on the curb?" "Because it belongs there," she said simply. "It smells Ethan. It smells like dust and old age and mothballs. I am redecorating the living room for the winter season, and that monstrosity does not fit the aesthetic. It is an eyesore." "It is not an eyesore," I shouted, surprising even myself. "It was my wife's chair. You have no right to throw it away." "I have every right," she snapped, stepping out onto the porch, but staying under the shelter of the overhang. "This is my house. I decide what goes in and what goes out, and I decided that dusty, bacteria-ridden chair is garbage. Do not bring it back inside." I ignored her. I turned back to the chair, gripping the wet wood until my knuckles turned white. I pulled again, dragging it toward the garage door. I would put it in the garage. I would hide it. Leave it alone. Ethan, Brittany screamed, her voice shrill. If you drag that soaking wet trash into my garage, you will ruin the epoxy floor. I forbid it. I did not stop. I was fueled by a rage so hot it kept the cold rain at bay. I was going to save this one piece of my past. Then I saw him. I looked up toward the second-floor window, the one that belonged to the master bedroom. The curtains were drawn back. Tyrell was standing there. My son. He was wearing his silk robe, holding a glass of red wine in one hand. The light from the room illuminated his face clearly. He was looking down at me. He saw his father, 71 years old, struggling in the freezing rain to save his dead mother's favorite chair. He saw his wife screaming at me from the porch. I stopped pulling. I stood up straight, wiping the rain from my eyes, and I locked gazes with him. "Help me, son," I whispered, though I knew he could not hear me. "Help me." For a moment I thought he would. I saw a flicker of something in his eyes. Shame, maybe, or memory. Maybe he remembered sitting in that chair on his mother's lap while she read him stories. Maybe he remembered how she nursed him through the chicken pox in that chair. But then Brittany turned and looked up at him too. She gestured wildly at me, pointing at the street. Tyrell looked at her. Then he looked back at me. He took a sip of his wine. And then slowly, deliberately, he reached out and pulled the curtain shut. The window went dark. He had turned his back. He had seen me suffering. He had seen me humiliated, and he had chosen to close the curtain. He had chosen the warmth of his room and the approval of his wife over the dignity of his father. I stood there frozen. The pain of the physical exertion faded, replaced by a numbness that spread from my heart to my fingertips. The bond, the invisible cord that connects a father to his son, snapped in that moment. It did not break with a noise. It broke with a silence so profound it drowned out the storm. "Leave it, Ethan," Brittany yelled triumphantly, seeing that I had stopped. "Even your son knows it is trash. Get back in your basement before you catch pneumonia and we have to pay for your hospital bills." She slammed the front door. The lock clicked loudly. I was alone in the driveway with the chair. Then I heard the sound. The low, mechanical grind of gears shifting. The high-pitched squeal of brakes. The garbage truck. It turned the corner, its headlights cutting through the rain like searchlights. It was a massive green beast rumbling toward me. It was not the regular trash day, but Brittany must have called for a special bulk pickup. She had planned this. She had timed it perfectly. I looked at the chair. It was sodden. The wood was scratched from where I had dragged it. It looked pathetic sitting there in the driveway. The truck stopped right in front of the house. Two men in reflective vests jumped off the back. They looked at me standing there in the dark. "This going, sir?" one of them asked, pointing to the chair. I looked at the window where my son was hiding. I looked at the closed front door. I looked at the chair one last time. Beatrice was not in that chair. Beatrice was in a better place. And the memory of her was not in the velvet or the wood. It was in me. But the Tyrell I knew, the boy I raised, he was gone. He had died the moment he closed that curtain. "Yes," I said, my voice flat and dead. "Take it." The men grabbed the chair. They tossed it into the back of the hopper with practiced ease. I watched as the hydraulic press came down. The metal teeth bit into the red velvet. There was a sickening crunch of wood splintering. The chair folded in on itself, crushed by the immense pressure until it was nothing but debris indistinguishable from the rest of the garbage. The truck roared as the engine revved and it pulled away, leaving a cloud of diesel exhaust hanging in the wet air. I stood there for a long time. The rain plastered my hair to my skull. My clothes were heavy with water. I was shivering, but I did not feel the cold anymore. I felt something else. I felt a clarity that was terrifying in its purity. I had been holding back. For years I had been holding back. I had hidden my wealth because I wanted to be loved for myself. I had tolerated their disrespect because I wanted to keep the peace. I had endured their insults because I wanted to be a father. But a father protects his family. And these people, these strangers who lived in my house, who spent my money, who threw my memories into the trash, they were not my family. They were parasites. And you do not negotiate with parasites. You exterminate them. I turned and walked toward the side gate that led to the basement entrance. I did not run. I did not cry. The tears that had mixed with the rain on my cheeks had dried up. My eyes were dry now. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. It was wet, but it was waterproof, military grade, just like everything else in my real life. I dialed Solomon. It was late, but he would answer. Sir Solomon's voice was groggy. He must have been asleep. Add the house to the list, I said into the darkness. Sir, the house. I repeated, looking up at the dark window where my son slept. The deed transfer. It was never finalized, was it? We kept it in the trust for tax purposes. That is correct, sir. Technically, the Carter Trust owns the property. Tyrell Carter is listed as a tenant with a zero rent agreement subject to conduct clauses. Revoke it, I said. Revoke the agreement. Solomon asked, fully awake now. Revoke it all. He violated the conduct clause. He failed to maintain the property, and he failed to treat the landlord with respect. Prepare the eviction notice. For when, sir? For Friday, I said. When we enter that boardroom, I want him to know he has no home to go back to. Understood, Mr. Carter. I hung up. I walked down the concrete steps to my basement. I stripped off my wet clothes and put on dry ones. I sat on the edge of the bed and listened to the silence of the house above me. They were sleeping warm and dry in their beds, thinking they had won, thinking they had put the old man in his place, thinking the trash had been taken out. They were right, the trash had been taken out, but they were wrong about who the trash was. I lay down and stared into the dark. I did not see the ceiling. I saw the red velvet being crushed. And I smiled a smile that would have terrified my son if he had been brave enough to look out the window one more time. Friday was coming, and hell was coming with me. The suit smelled of lavender sachets and a decade of silence. It was a charcoal gray three-piece suit cut from Italian wool, the kind of fabric that breathed with you. I had bought it in 1998 for the ribbon-cutting ceremony of my third distribution center in Memphis. Back then, it was a symbol of my triumph, a testament that a black man from the south side of Atlanta could build an empire of steel and wheels. Now, as I buttoned the vest over a stomach that was not quite as flat as it used to be, it felt like a costume, a clown suit designed to entertain the court of a petty tyrant. Brittany stood in the doorway of the basement room, her arms crossed over her chest. She was wearing a cocktail dress that shimmered like oil on water. Her makeup was flawless, her hair sprayed into a helmet of perfection. She looked at me not with pride, but with the critical eye of a livestock appraiser inspecting a mule. It fits better than I thought, she said, her voice devoid of warmth. I was worried you would look like a hobo. Listen to me carefully, Ethan. Tonight is important. Tyrell is trying to impress the regional vice president. We have friends coming from the club. These are people who matter. I adjusted my tie, looking at her reflection in the small cracked mirror on the wall. People who matter. I wondered if she knew that the regional vice president she was so desperate to impress worked for a subsidiary that I had acquired 6 months ago. I wondered if she knew that with a single phone call I could have that man parking trucks in Alaska. I understand, I said, my voice low and steady. Good, she snapped. You are to circulate with the wine and the hors d'oeuvres. Keep the glasses full, but do not hover. Do not engage in conversation. If someone speaks to you, smile, nod, and move away. You are the help tonight, Ethan. Do not forget that. We fired the catering staff to save money since we are supporting you now, so you need to earn your keep. She turned on her heel and marched up the stairs, the click of her heels sounding like gunfire. I stood there for a moment, smoothing the lapel of my suit. I felt a familiar heat rising in my chest, the old fire that had fueled me through union strikes and hostile takeovers. But I tamped it down. Not yet. The trap was set, but the prey had not yet fully committed. I walked up the stairs into the kitchen. The house was transformed. Candles flickered on every surface. Jazz music, soft and inoffensive, played from hidden speakers. The kitchen island was covered in trays of intricate appetizers that looked like they cost more than my first truck. Tyrell was there opening bottles of wine. He looked handsome in his tuxedo, but his eyes were darting around the room, nervous and fearful. He saw me, and for a second he looked ashamed. He looked at his father, a man who had carried him on his shoulders, dressed up to serve his friends. Dad, he started, his voice a whisper. You look sharp, son, I said, cutting him off. I did not want his apologies. Apologies were easy. Action was hard. The doorbell rang. Brittany swept into the kitchen, her face transformed into a mask of radiant hospitality. Showtime, she announced. Ethan grabbed the tray. Tyrell, get the door. I picked up the heavy silver tray laden with crystal flutes of champagne. My hands were steady. They were strong hands that could strip an engine block or sign $1 million check with equal precision. I walked out into the living room as the guests began to flood in. They were a flock of peacocks. Men in rented tuxedos and women in dresses that showed too much skin and too little class. They laughed too loud. They drank too fast. I moved among them, a ghost in a gray suit. Champagne. I asked, offering the tray to a tall man with a red face. He took a glass without looking at me, continuing his story about his golf handicap. I moved on. I watched them. I listened. This was my superpower. I had built my fortune by listening when others talked. I heard snippets of conversation about leased luxury cars, about credit card limits, about impending divorces. These people were not rich. They were drowning in debt, desperately treading water to keep their noses above the surface of their own expectations. They were hollow, just like the house they stood in. I circled the room, refilling glasses, picking up discarded napkins. My back began to ache, a dull throb near my spine. I ignored it. Then I approached a group near the fireplace. Brittany was there holding court with 3 other women. They were laughing at something, holding their glasses delicately. "Oh, Brittany, this party is divine," one woman said. "And where did you find this charming old waiter? He adds such a vintage touch. It is like being in a period drama." Brittany laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Oh, that is just Ethan," she said, waving her hand dismissively in my direction. "He is Tyrell's father. He lives with us. We try to keep him useful. You know how it is with the elderly. If you do not give them chores, they just rot away in front of the television." The women giggled. "Is it safe?" another asked, eyeing me with mock concern. "My grandmother got the shakes so bad she dropped a pot of boiling water." "You have to be careful with them. They are like toddlers." Brittany stepped closer to me. She reached out and patted my cheek. It was a gesture so condescending, so disrespectful, that it took every ounce of my will not to slap her hand away. "Oh, Ethan is harmless," she said. "He is a bit slow and his hands shake a little, but he knows his place." "Right, Ethan." I looked at her. I looked at the women snickering behind their hands. I saw Tyrell approaching the group. He had heard. He had heard them call me slow. He had heard them compare me to a toddler. Tyrell laughed. He laughed. It was a weak, forced chuckle, but it was a laugh nonetheless. "Yeah, Dad loves it," he said, clapping me on the shoulder. "He hates being idle. Gives him a sense of purpose to serve." The betrayal was physical. It felt like a punch to the gut. He was selling my dignity to buy a moment of acceptance from these shallow strangers. He was trading his father for a laugh. I looked at my son. I saw the fear in his eyes, the desperation to fit in. But I also saw the cowardice. And for the first time I realized that I could not save him. You cannot save a man who is willing to enslave himself. I turned away from him, my face a mask of stone. I moved to refill the glass of a man standing near the white rug. He was the regional vice president, the man Tyrell wanted to impress. He was pontificating about the market, unaware that the man pouring his wine owned the market. "More Pinot Noir, sir?" I asked. He held out his glass without looking at me, continuing his diatribe. As I poured, Brittany bumped into me. It was deliberate. I felt her elbow check my ribs, a subtle, sharp jab meant to hurry me up. The bottle jerked in my hand. A single drop of dark red wine, a sphere of crimson liquid, fell from the lip of the bottle. It hung in the air for a fraction of a second before landing on the pristine white sleeve of the vice president's shirt. It was a tiny spot, a speck, but the reaction was nuclear. "You clumsy idiot!" Brittany shrieked. The music seemed to stop. The conversation died. All eyes turned to us. Brittany grabbed my wrist. Her nails dug into my skin. "Look what you did," she hissed. "That is a custom shirt, you senile old fool." And then she did it. She raised her other hand and slapped the back of my hand, the hand holding the wine bottle. It was a sharp, stinging slap, the kind you would give to a misbehaving dog or a naughty child who reached for a cookie. It was not a blow of violence, it was a blow of correction. It was a blow of ownership. The sound of the slap echoed in the silent room. I stood perfectly still. I did not drop the bottle. I did not flinch. I did not lower my eyes. Slowly, deliberately, I set the bottle down on the side table. I pulled a linen napkin from my pocket and wiped the spot where her hand had struck mine. Then I looked at her. I did not look at her as a father-in-law. I did not look at her as a tenant. I looked at her as the chairman of Carter Logistics. I channeled 50 years of boardrooms, 50 years of firing incompetent executives, 50 years of crushing competitors. I narrowed my eyes slightly. My posture straightened, the ache in my back forgotten. The air around me seemed to cool. Brittany froze. Her mouth was open, ready to scream more insults, but the words died in her throat. She looked into my eyes, and for the first time she saw something other than the old man she bullied. She saw a predator. She saw a darkness that was deep and ancient and dangerous. She took a step back, her hand trembling. The fear on her face was primal. She did not know why she was scared. She did not know who I really was. But her instincts, the lizard brain that warns a gazelle when a lion is in the grass, were screaming at her to run. I picked up the tray again. I looked at Tyrell, who was staring at me with his mouth agape. I looked at the guests, who were shifting uncomfortably. "My apologies," I said, my voice low and smooth, carrying to every corner of the room. "I seem to have lost my touch. It will not happen again." I turned and walked toward the kitchen. I did not hurry. I walked with the slow, measured gait of a man who owns the ground he walks on. As I pushed through the swinging door, I heard the babble of voices start up again, nervous and high-pitched. They were trying to laugh it off, trying to pretend that nothing had happened. But something had happened. The balance had shifted. I set the tray down on the counter. I looked at my hand where the red mark from her slap was fading. That was the last time, I thought. That was the last time anyone lays a hand on me. I took off the apron she had made me wear. I folded it neatly and placed it on the counter. I adjusted my cuffs. Friday was coming, and when Friday came, they would not be dealing with the servant. They would be dealing with the master. The plan required bait, and like any good trap, the bait had to be irresistible to the specific hunger of the prey. Brittany and Tyrell were not hungry for food or love or security. They were hungry for easy money. They starved for unearned wealth. I sat on the edge of my lumpy mattress in the dim light of the basement, holding the small blue passbook in my hands. It was an artifact from a bygone era, a physical record of a savings account that I had instructed Solomon to create just 2 days ago. The balance printed on the last line was $52,400. To me, it was pocket change. It was the fuel cost for a single cross-country fleet run. But to them, to the people living above me who financed their lifestyle on credit and hope, it was a fortune. It was a lifeline. It was a treasure chest buried in the basement. I waited until I heard the heavy thud of the front door signaling that Tyrell had left for work. Brittany was home. She did not work. Her days were spent online shopping and reorganizing the pantry. I knew her routine. Around 10 in the morning, she would come down to the basement ostensibly to do laundry, but in reality she came to snoop. She checked for hoarded food or hidden alcohol, anything she could use to build a case against me. I placed the passbook in the top drawer of the bedside table. I did not hide it under the socks. I laid it right on top. Then I left the drawer open just a crack, a sliver of blue visible to anyone looking. I put on my coat and walked out the back door, making sure to slam it loud enough for her to hear. I walked to the park at the end of the street and sat on a bench feeding pigeons with dry crusts of bread. I imagined the scene unfolding in my absence. I imagined her descending the stairs. I imagined her eyes scanning the room. I imagined the moment she saw the drawer. Her heart would skip a beat. She would reach out her manicured fingers, trembling. She would open the book. $50,000. She would gasp. She would do the math. That money could pay off the credit cards. It could pay for a vacation. It could buy the new SUV she had been complaining about. She would take a picture of it. She would text Tyrell, and then the performance would begin. I stayed at the park for 2 hours, letting the anticipation build. When I returned, the house was quiet. I went down to the basement. The drawer was exactly as I had left it. But the passbook had been moved. It was rotated slightly, the corner bent. She had found it. The seed was planted. Now I just had to wait for the harvest. The harvest came at 6 o'clock that evening. Usually dinner was a solitary affair for me. I would heat up a can of soup on the hot plate in the basement or eat a sandwich over the sink. But tonight the smell of roasting chicken and garlic wafted down the stairs. It was a rich, savory scent that reminded me of the days when Beatrice was alive, when our home was filled with warmth. There was a knock on the basement door, a gentle, tentative knock. Dad Tyrell's voice came through the wood, soft and inviting. "Dad, are you down there?" I opened the door. Tyrell stood there smiling. It was a nervous smile, a smile that didn't quite fit his face anymore, but he was trying. "Brittany made dinner," he said. "We made extra. We thought maybe you would like to join us upstairs. You know, have a family meal." I looked at him. I looked for a trace of shame, but found only desperation masked as kindness. "That sounds nice, son," I said, playing the part of the lonely, grateful old man. I followed him up the stairs. The dining room table was set, not with the everyday plates, but with the good china. Candles were lit. Brittany was bringing a golden roasted chicken to the table. She looked up and smiled at me. It was terrifying. It was the smile of a shark that had just smelled blood in the water. "Ethan," she cooed. "Sit down. Here, let me take your coat. You look tired. Have you been walking too much? You really should rest more at your age." She pulled out my chair. She poured me a glass of wine. She heaped my plate with chicken and potatoes. "Eat up," she urged. "You are looking so thin. We have been so worried about you." We ate in a silence that was vastly different from the hostility of the previous nights. This silence was thick with anticipation. They were waiting for the right moment to strike. They filled my glass every time I took a sip. They asked me about my day, about the weather, about my health. Then the performance shifted gears. Tyrell put down his fork and sighed deeply, a heavy, theatrical sigh. "Is something wrong, son?" I asked on cue. Tyrell looked at Brittany. She nodded encouragingly, her eyes wide with feigned sympathy. "It is just things are hard, Dad," Tyrell said, his voice trembling. "We are drowning. The mortgage, the car payments, the credit cards. We tried to shield you from it because we did not want you to worry. But the truth is, we might lose the house." Brittany let out a small sob. She dabbed at her dry eyes with a napkin. "We just want to provide a good home for you, Ethan," she whimpered. "We want you to be comfortable, but the bank keeps calling. If we do not come up with $20,000 by the end of the week, they are going to foreclose. We will all be on the street." She looked at me pleadingly. "We do not know what to do. We have nowhere to turn." I watched them. I watched their crocodile tears. I watched the way they leaned toward me, hungry and expectant. They knew about the money in the drawer. They were not asking for help. They were staging a play where I was the savior, and they were the innocent victims of a cruel economy. They did not mention the leasing fees on the Mercedes in the driveway. They did not mention the designer clothes in the closet. They did not mention the $3,000 they had demanded from me just days ago. I felt a cold, hard knot in my stomach. It was disgust, pure, unadulterated disgust. But I swallowed it down with a piece of chicken. "I might be able to help," I said slowly. Tyrell's head snapped up. His eyes lit up with greed. "Really? Dad, you do not have to. I mean, we know you are on a fixed income. I have some savings," I said, my voice trembling with feigned uncertainty. "Money I put away a long time ago. For an emergency." "Oh," Ethan, Brittany gushed, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. Her palm was damp. "You are a saint. We would pay you back. I promise. As soon as Tyrell gets his bonus." "I know you would," I said. "I trust you. You are my family." I stood up and walked to the basement door. I could feel their eyes boring into my back. I went down to my room. I opened the drawer and took out the passbook. Inside the plastic cover, I kept a single checkbook. It was a real account linked to a slush fund I used for charitable donations. I wrote the check, $20,000. My hand did not shake. I signed my name clearly, Ethan Carter. I walked back upstairs. The room was silent. I handed the check to Tyrell. He took it. He stared at the numbers. His hands were shaking. It was the most money he had ever held in his hand at one time. "Thank you, Dad," he whispered. "You saved us. You really saved us." Brittany hugged me. She smelled of expensive perfume and deceit. "Thank you, Ethan," she said. "We will never forget this." I knew they would forget it. They would forget it the moment the check cleared. I went back to the basement, leaving them to celebrate their victory. I lay on my bed and listened to their muffled cheers upstairs. They were toasting their cleverness. They were laughing at how easy it had been to trick the old man. I did not sleep well that night. The taste of the chicken was ash in my mouth. The next afternoon, I was sweeping the front walk when Tyrell's car pulled into the driveway. He got out carrying a small shopping bag. He looked different. He walked with a bounce in his step. The weight of the impending foreclosure seemed to have miraculously vanished. "Hey, Dad," he called out cheerfully. "Beautiful day, isn't it?" He walked past me toward the front door. As he reached for the handle, his sleeve rode up. The sunlight caught the flash of gold. I froze. I knew watches. I collected them. I knew the bezel. I knew the weight. It was a Rolex Submariner, gold and steel, blue dial, retail price roughly $14,000. He saw me looking. He quickly pulled his sleeve down, covering the watch. He looked guilty for a split second, then the arrogance returned. "Just treated myself to a little something," he muttered. "You know, image is everything in my business. Need to look successful to be successful. He went inside. I stood there gripping the broom handle. He had taken the money I gave him to save his home, the money I gave him out of love and trust, and he had bought a watch. He had chosen a status symbol over security. He had chosen vanity over honor. He had not paid the debt. He had not saved the house. He had simply adorned his wrist. The final doubt, the tiny microscopic sliver of hope that I had held on to, vanished. There was no redemption for him. There was no saving him. He was rot all the way through. I turned and walked to the basement. I pulled the toolbox from under the bed. I took out the black leather notebook. I opened it to a fresh page. I picked up my pen. Date Tuesday, October 10th. Amount $20,000. Purpose emergency loan for mortgage. Actual use, luxury wristwatch. I closed the book. The trap had snapped shut. The metal teeth had bitten deep into the bone. They were caught. They just didn't know they were bleeding out yet. Friday, I whispered to the empty room. Friday, they learn. The basement air was stale and thick with the humidity of a looming storm when Tyrell came down the stairs. He carried a leather portfolio under his arm tucked tight against his ribs, as if he were guarding nuclear codes. He wore a smile that was too bright, too wide, and entirely hollow. It was the smile of a used car salesman trying to move a lemon off the lot before the engine seized. I sat in my armchair, the one piece of furniture down here that offered any comfort, and watched him descend. I knew that portfolio. I knew the weight of the paper inside. I knew the smell of fresh ink and betrayal. "Hey, Dad," Tyrell said, his voice pitching up an octave in forced cheerfulness. "I have some great news. Brittany and I have been up all night working on this for you." He pulled a metal folding chair from the corner and sat across from me, his knees almost touching mine. He placed the portfolio on his lap and unzipped it with a slow, dramatic flourish. "We found this incredible program," he continued, speaking fast, the words tumbling out of him. "It is called the Senior Guardian Initiative. It is basically a premium health insurance package. It covers everything: dental, vision, long-term care, even hearing aids. You know how expensive those can be. And the best part is that because of your age and your veteran status, you qualify for the platinum tier." He held out a thick stack of documents. The paper was heavy-bonded legal stock. It looked impressive. It looked official. It looked like a lie wrapped in a bow. I took the papers. My hands shook slightly, a tremor I allowed to surface. I saw Tyrell's eyes track the movement, his gaze hungry and impatient. "Insurance?" I asked, my voice slow and gravelly. "I already have Medicare, son, and the VA takes care of my checkups." "This is different," Tyrell insisted, leaning forward. "This is supplemental. It fills the gaps. Medicare does not cover everything, Dad. What if you need a specialist? What if you need surgery? This plan ensures you get the best care without paying a dime out of pocket. We just want you to be safe. We want to make sure you are taken care of." I looked down at the document. The cover page did indeed say Senior Guardian Initiative in bold, comforting letters. But as I turned the page, my eyes fell on the dense blocks of legal text. I did not need to read every word to know what this was. I had drafted contracts that merged corporations. I had signed deals that moved fleets across international borders. I recognized the language of acquisition. This was not an insurance policy. It was a durable power of attorney coupled with a living trust transfer. It was a document that would grant Tyrell Carter full, unrestricted control over every asset, bank account, and property held in my name. It gave him the right to sell my house, access my pension, and make medical decisions on my behalf, including the decision to institutionalize me. I reached into my shirt pocket and pulled out my reading glasses. They were drugstore glasses, cheap wire frames with a smudge on the left lens. I put them on, slowly adjusting them on my nose. I licked my thumb and turned the page. I let the silence stretch. I read one line, then looked up at the ceiling as if pondering it, then read the next. I saw Tyrell bouncing his leg. The heel of his shoe tapped a nervous rhythm against the concrete floor. "This part here," I said, pointing a calloused finger at paragraph 4. "It says something about asset management. Why does a health insurance plan need to manage my assets, Tyrell?" Tyrell laughed, a nervous burst of air. Oh, that is just standard boilerplate language, Dad. It is for billing. You know how hospitals are. If you are incapacitated, if you are in a coma or something, they need to know who to bill. It just allows them to process the payments directly from the insurance trust so you do not get harassed by debt collectors. It protects you. Protects me, I repeated. I looked at him over the rim of my glasses. And this part. The part about power of attorney. It says you get to decide where I live. Tyrell's smile faltered. A bead of sweat trickled down his temple. Dad, you are reading too much into it. That is just in case of an emergency. Like if there is a fire or a flood and we need to move you to a hotel or a specialized facility for your safety. We cannot wait for a judge to sign off on it while the house is burning down, can we? We need to be able to act fast to save you. He reached out and touched my knee. His hand was cold and clammy. Trust me, Dad. Have I ever steered you wrong? I am your son. I am the only one looking out for you. Brittany and I just want to make sure your golden years are actually golden. I looked at paragraph 7. It was the clause that allowed the agent to liquidate real estate holdings. He wanted to sell the house. He wanted to sell the house I had bought for him, the house he lived in, so he could pocket the equity and move to a bigger mansion, leaving me to rot in whatever state-funded hole he could find. I flipped the page again. I squinted. I moved the paper closer to my face, then further away, acting as if my eyes were failing me. I do not know, son, I mumbled. The print is so small. And these words, fiduciary, beneficiary, revocable. It is all very confusing. Maybe I should show this to that nice man at the legal aid clinic downtown, just to have him explain it to me. Tyrell snapped. The mask of the concerned son fell away, revealing the desperate, greedy man beneath. He stood up so fast his chair scraped loudly against the floor. He slammed his hand down on the stack of papers in my lap. We do not have time for that, he shouted, his voice echoing off the basement walls. The enrollment period ends today, Dad, today. If we do not send this in by 5 o'clock, you lose the spot. Do you know how hard I worked to get you this deal? Do you know how many strings I pulled? He began to pace the small room, his hands balling into fists. I am trying to help you, he yelled. I am trying to save your life, and you are sitting here nitpicking over legal jargon. You do not even understand. You are being ungrateful. You are being stubborn and difficult, just like Brittany said. He spun around and pointed a finger in my face. Just sign the damn papers, old man. Do it for once in your life. Do something that does not make my life harder. Sign it so I do not have to worry about you dying and leaving us with a mountain of medical debt. Sign it because I am your son, and I said so. I shrank back in my chair, feigning fear. I let my lower lip tremble. I looked at him with wide, watery eyes. Okay, son, I said, my voice quavering. Okay. I did not mean to upset you. I just wanted to understand. I do not need you to understand, Tyrell hissed, thrusting a pen at me. I need you to sign. Right there. Next to the X. He pointed to the signature line. The line that would sign away my freedom, my dignity, and my life. I took the pen. It was a cheap plastic ballpoint. I held it hovering over the paper. Tyrell held his breath. I could see the greed vibrating in him. He was already spending the money. He was already buying the new car, the vacations, the respect he thought he could purchase. I lowered the pen to the paper. I had a signature. The signature of Ethan Carter, the truck driver. It was a messy scrawl, barely legible. But I also had a signature for Ethan Carter, the chairman, a signature that moved millions, a signature that was registered with every major bank and legal firm in the state. That signature was precise. It had a specific flourish on the C and a sharp underline beneath the full name. And then I had the safety signature. Years ago, Solomon and I had established a protocol. If I was ever under duress, if I was ever kidnapped or coerced into signing a document, I would use a specific variation. I would loop the H in Ethan backwards. To the naked eye, it looked like a normal signature. But to Solomon, to the bank, to the fraud department, it was a screaming siren. It meant void. It meant coercion. It meant danger. I pressed the pen to the paper. I wrote my name slowly, my hand shaking just enough to sell the act. ETH. I made the loop. Backward. Broken. ANCARTER. I lifted the pen. I looked at the signature. It looked pathetic. It looked like the writing of a defeated old man. But it was a trap. It was a landmine buried in ink. I handed the papers back to Tyrell. There, I said softly, it is done. Tyrell snatched the papers from my hand. He flipped to the signature page, checking it. A wide, triumphant grin split his face. He let out a breath he had been holding for 10 minutes. "Great," he said, his voice suddenly smooth again. "That is great, Dad. You made the right choice. You will see. This is going to make everything better." He zipped up the portfolio, hugging it to his chest. He looked at me one last time, not with love, but with the dismissal one gives to a tool that has served its purpose. "Get some rest," he said. "You look exhausted." He turned and practically ran up the stairs. I heard him shouting for Brittany before he even reached the top. I heard their excited whispers, their laughter. They were celebrating. They thought they had just won the lottery. I sat alone in the basement. The silence settled back around me, heavy and cold. I looked at my hand, the hand that had just signed my death warrant according to them. But I knew better. I had not signed away my life. I had signed away theirs. That piece of paper was worthless. It would not unlock my accounts. It would not transfer the deed. It would trigger a fraud alert at the bank the moment he tried to use it. It would notify Solomon that the hostile takeover had been attempted. Tyrell thought he was holding the keys to the kingdom. In reality, he was holding the evidence of his own crime. I leaned back in the chair and closed my eyes. I felt a deep, profound sadness. Not fear. Sadness. I had given him a chance. I had given him so many chances. Even in that moment, if he had shown 1 ounce of patience, 1 shred of respect, I might have hesitated. But he had shouted. He had bullied. He had revealed the depth of his contempt. "So be it," I whispered to the empty room. Friday was coming. And on Friday, he would try to use that power of attorney. He would walk into the headquarters of Carter Logistics, waving that paper like a flag of conquest. And he would find out that he had marched straight into the firing line. The cold was not a natural weather event. It was a weapon. It was a tactical decision made with the precision of a military strike. The moment the ink was dry on that fraudulent power of attorney document, the climate in the basement changed. I woke up at 3 a.m, shivering so violently my teeth chattered. I could see my breath puffing out in white clouds in the dim light of the street lamp filtering through the high, narrow window. I checked the radiator. It was stone cold. I put my hand against the pipes. They were ice. I knew what had happened. There was a separate zone valve for the basement heating loop. I had installed it myself 15 years ago to ensure efficiency. Brittany had found it. She had gone to the utility panel in the garage and turned the dial to 0. I pulled the thin wool blanket tighter around my shoulders. It was the only bedding they had left me after the laundry purge. The heavy quilt Beatrice had made, the one that smelled of cedar and safety, had vanished 2 days ago. Brittany claimed it was full of dust mites. I knew she just wanted to strip me of any comfort. Morning came with a gray, ruthless light. My stomach growled a hollow, aching sound that echoed in the quiet room. I waited for the usual knock, the one that signaled breakfast. Usually it was oatmeal or toast, simple but hot. Today there was no knock. I waited until 10 o'clock. My hunger became a sharp pain. I walked to the stairs, my joints stiff from the freezing temperature. I tried the door handle. It was locked. They had locked me in. They had locked the owner of the house, the man whose money paid for the locks, into his own basement. I knocked. Not a polite tap, but a heavy thud. "Hello," I called out. My voice was raspy, real phlegm mixing with the act. "Is anyone there?" I heard footsteps, the click of the lock. The door opened 3 inches. Brittany stood there. She did not open it fully. She looked at me through the crack, her face a mask of annoyance. "What is it, Ethan?" she snapped. "I am busy." "It is cold, Brittany," I said, letting my shoulders slump. "The heat. It is off. And I have not eaten." Brittany sighed, a long, exaggerated exhalation of air. "The furnace is acting up," she lied smoothly. "We have to conserve heat for the main floors. Tyrell needs to be warm for work. And Olivia needs to study. You are down here doing nothing, so you generate less body heat. Put on a sweater." She shoved a paper plate through the crack in the door. "Here." I took it. On the plate were 2 slices of white bread, not toasted, just raw, dry bread, and a single slice of processed cheese still in the plastic wrapper. "We are on a budget," she said. "Until we get access to your accounts properly processed, we have to cut back. You understand, right? You want to help the family." She did not wait for an answer. She slammed the door. I heard the lock click again. I stood there in the dark holding the dry bread. This was not budgeting. This was torture. This was an attempt to break my spirit, to make me weak and compliant so I would die faster. They wanted pneumonia to do the dirty work their hands were too cowardly to do. I sat on the mattress and ate the bread. I chewed slowly, savoring the meager sustenance. I needed my strength. I needed to fuel the fire that was burning in my gut. By afternoon, the basement was a meat locker. My fingers were numb. I decided it was time to turn up the volume. I needed them to say it. I needed the audio evidence that would seal their fate in a courtroom and in the court of public opinion. I began to cough. I had driven trucks through smog and dust for 40 years. I knew how to produce a cough that sounded like death rattling a cage. I drew air deep into my lungs and let it explode out. It was a wet, hacking sound. A sound that spoke of fluid in the lungs, of sickness, of decline. I coughed until my throat felt raw. I coughed until I was dizzy. I heard movement upstairs. They were listening. They were wondering if this was it, if the old engine was finally seizing up. I moved to the bottom of the stairs. I slumped against the wall, wrapping my arms around my chest. I let out a groan that turned into a coughing fit so violent it shook my frame. "Help!" I wheezed loud enough for them to hear, but weak enough to sound pathetic. "Please, it hurts." The door opened again. Brittany appeared at the top of the stairs. She was holding a glass of wine. She looked down at me, huddled in the shadows. She did not look concerned. She looked impatient. "Stop that noise," she hissed. "You are disturbing my yoga time." "Brittany," I gasped, reaching a hand up toward her. "I think I am sick. My chest. It is heavy. I need a doctor." "We are not calling a doctor," she said immediately. "Doctors cost money, Ethan. Money we do not have because you have been hoarding it all these years. Besides, what are they going to do? You are old. Things break." She took a sip of her wine, watching me suffer. "Stop being so dramatic," she said. "It is just a cold. Sleep it off." I coughed again, a long, rattling spasm that left me gasping for air. I looked up at her, my eyes wide with feigned terror. "I feel like I am dying," I whispered. Brittany looked at me. She leaned over the railing, her face twisted into a sneer of pure malice. "Then die," she said. The words hung in the freezing air. "Die soon," she continued, her voice low and venomous. "Do us all a favor, Ethan. Die soon, so we can finally live. You are a burden. You are a millstone around Tyrell's neck. Just let go. Stop fighting. It would be so much easier for everyone if you just stopped breathing." She turned and walked away, leaving the door open just enough so I could hear her humming to herself as she went back to the living room. I sat there in the dark. The shock of her words did not hurt me. I expected it from her. She was a stranger. She was a predator I had allowed into the fold. But then I heard the front door open. Tyrell was home. I heard his heavy footsteps in the hallway. I heard Brittany greet him with a kiss. I heard the murmur of their voices. Babe, Brittany said loud enough for me to hear. "Your dad is having one of his episodes again. Coughing and moaning. He is just looking for attention. Do not encourage him." I heard Tyrell sigh. "I need to check on him," he said. My heart sparked with a tiny flicker of hope. Maybe. Just maybe. Tyrell appeared at the top of the stairs. He was wearing his new Rolex. It glinted under the hallway light. He looked down into the gloom of the basement. He saw me sitting on the floor, wrapped in the thin blanket, shivering violently. He saw the uneaten crust of bread on the floor. He felt the wave of cold air rising from the basement. "Dad," he said. I looked up at him. I let my face show all the agony and betrayal I felt. "Son," I rasped. "It is freezing. Please, turn the heat on. Or just bring me a blanket. A real blanket. I am so cold." Tyrell looked at me. He looked at the thermostat on the wall behind him. He knew where the controls were. He knew how to fix it. I saw the conflict in his face. I saw the moment he weighed his comfort against my suffering. I saw him think about the arguments he would have to have with Brittany if he helped me. I saw him think about the money he believed he was going to inherit if I just faded away. He looked at his watch. The watch he bought with my money. "The heater is broken, Dad." He lied. His voice was flat. "We called the repairman. He cannot come until next week. You just have to tough it out." He lied to my face. He left his father to freeze because he was too much of a coward to stand up to his wife or too greedy to care. "I will bring you a coat," he muttered, turning away. He never brought the coat. He closed the door. He locked it. I sat in the silence. The cold was biting now, numbing my toes and fingers. But the fire inside me was raging. I reached into the pocket of my flannel shirt. I pulled out the device. It was a digital voice recorder the size of a stick of gum. High fidelity, long-range microphone. I pressed the stop button. The tiny red light blinked once and went out. I had it. I had Brittany telling me to die. I had Tyrell refusing me heat and lying about the repairman. I had the sound of the lock clicking shut. This was not just evidence of bad character. This was evidence of elder abuse. This was evidence of criminal negligence. This was a felony. I stood up. My legs were stiff, but they held me. I walked to my bed and pulled out the toolbox. I placed the recorder inside, nestled next to the satellite phone. They wanted me to die. They wanted me to be a memory, a line item in a bank ledger. They had made a fatal miscalculation. They thought I was trapped in here with them. But come Friday, they would realize that they were trapped in here with me. I lay down on the mattress and pulled the thin blanket over my head. I did not shiver anymore. I was stone. I was ice. I was the mountain they were about to crash into. Friday was tomorrow. And tomorrow the bill would come due. The smell of brewing coffee drifted down into the basement like a ghost of the life I used to have. It was a rich hazelnut blend, the kind I used to buy for Beatrice on our anniversary. Now it was just another reminder of what was being kept from me. I sat on the edge of my mattress, rubbing the stiffness from my knees. The cold from the previous night had settled deep into my joints, making every movement a negotiation with pain, but my mind was sharp. My mind was a diamond cutting through glass. I heard the scrape of chairs upstairs. I heard the rustle of glossy paper. I heard the low murmur of voices plotting. I stood up and walked to the ventilation grate near the ceiling. It was an old trick I had learned when Tyrell was a teenager sneaking out at night. Sound carried through the ductwork with surprising clarity. I stood on a milk crate and pressed my ear against the cold metal. "Look at this one," Tyrell Brittany was saying. Her voice was breathless with greed. "Just look at that portico. It is in Alpharetta, gated community, private security, no riffraff." I could hear the slap of a brochure hitting the granite island. "It is 4,000 square feet. Tyrell continued, the note of awe in his voice undeniable. "But the price, Brittany, 2.5 million. We cannot afford that. We can barely afford this place." "That is small thinking," Brittany snapped. "You have to think big to get big. Besides, I have been running the numbers. If we sell this place, we get the equity. That is a down payment. And once we get rid of the dead weight, our monthly expenses drop by almost $2,000. Plus, with the new power of attorney, we can liquidate his assets. The pension, the savings account I found, it all adds up, Tyrell. It adds up to us finally living the life we deserve." There was a silence. I could hear Tyrell pouring coffee. "And what about Dad?" he asked. His voice was lower, hesitant. "We cannot just leave him on the curb, Brittany. If we move to Alpharetta, there is no basement apartment. The HOA would never allow a boarder." Brittany laughed. It was a cold dismissal. "Of course he is not coming with us, Tyrell. Can you imagine? We are trying to network with doctors and lawyers and CEOs. Imagine having him shuffling around in his old work boots, coughing and looking like a beggar. He would ruin everything. We would be the laughingstock of the country club. No, he needs professional care." "Professional care," Tyrell repeated. "You mean a home." "I mean a facility," Brittany corrected. "I found one. It is called Green Valley State Center. It is about 2 hours south of here." Green Valley. I knew that name. Every trucker in Georgia knew that name. It was a warehouse for the indigent. It was a place where the state sent people who had no names and no money. It was a place where the ratio of nurses to patients was 1 to 50. It was a place where people died of bed sores and dehydration because no one bothered to bring them water. "That is a state facility," Brittany, Tyrell said. "I saw a report on the news about that place. They had a lice outbreak last year. They had a patient wander off and freeze to death in the woods." So Brittany said, her voice hard. "It is free, Tyrell. It is state-funded. We hand over his pension checks to them and they take care of the rest. It costs us nothing. Zero. That is $1,200 a month we keep in our pockets." "But he is not sick," Tyrell argued. "He is just old. He does not need a nursing home. He just needs a room." "He is senile," Brittany hissed. "He is erratic. He is aggressive. You saw how he looked at me the night of the party. He is dangerous, Tyrell. And I do not feel safe with him in the house. Think about our future. Think about the children we want to have. Do you want them growing up around that? Do you want them seeing him like this? I gripped the metal grate until my fingers hurt. She was painting me as a monster to justify her cruelty. She was rewriting reality to fit her narrative of ascension. Tyrell did not answer immediately. I held my breath. This was it. This was the final test. He knew Green Valley was a death sentence. He knew I was sane. He knew I had sacrificed my life for him. But Tyrell Brittany softened her voice, dropping it to a seductive whisper. Imagine the house in Alpharetta. Imagine the parties we could throw. Imagine the neighbors. No more looking over your shoulder, no more penny pinching. We would be established. We would be elite. Is that not what you want? Is that not what you promised me when we got married? I heard the sound of paper being pushed across the table. We can sign the listing agreement for this house today, she said. The realtor is ready, and I already printed the admission forms for Green Valley. All you have to do is agree. I waited. My heart hammered against my ribs like a prisoner demanding release. Say no, Tyrell. Say no. Whatever Tyrell said, his voice was a sigh of defeat, a surrender of the soul, what Brittany pressed. Whatever it takes, Tyrell said, the strength draining out of his voice with every syllable. You are right. We cannot keep living like this. He is holding us back. If Green Valley is the only option, then that is where he goes. We have to prioritize us. We have to prioritize the future children. It was done. He had said it. He had traded his father for a gated community. He had traded my life for a zip code. He had looked at the prospect of me dying alone in a state-run hellhole and decided it was a fair price to pay for a 4,000-square-foot house. Ethan realized that his son was not a victim. He was not a helpless man manipulated by a shrew. He was a willing participant. He was a man who had looked at the scales of morality and placed his greed on the heavier side. Good, Brittany said. I will call the movers. We can have him out by Friday. Friday. They had picked the day. They had unknowingly scheduled their own execution. I stepped down from the milk crate. My legs felt heavy as if I were wading through wet concrete. I walked to the center of the room and looked around. The peeling paint, the water stains on the ceiling, the cold concrete floor. This was not my home. This was a holding cell, and my sentence was up. I went to the toolbox. I moved the digital recorder aside and picked up the satellite phone. It felt cool and substantial in my hand. A link to the world where I was a king, not a pauper. I dialed Solomon. Mr. Carter. Solomon answered on the first ring. End it, I said. Sir Solomon asked. The timeline, I said, my voice devoid of emotion. Move it up. They are planning to move me on Friday. They are planning to put me in Green Valley. Solomon inhaled sharply. Green Valley. That is a death camp, sir. I know, I said. That is why we are striking first. Is the paperwork ready? The eviction notice, the restraining orders, the asset freeze, and the termination of employment. It is all drafted and notarized, sir. I was just waiting for your signal. You have it, I said. Do not wait for the end of the month. Do not wait for them to make another move. We execute on Friday morning. Friday morning, Solomon confirmed. And Solomon, I added, yes, sir. Make sure the Lincoln is clean. I want to see my reflection in the door. It will be spotless, sir. I hung up the phone. I placed it back in the velvet lining of the toolbox. I looked at the small window high on the wall. A single beam of sunlight struggled through the grime, illuminating dust motes dancing in the cold air. Tyrell had made his choice. He had chosen the future he thought he deserved. He was right about one thing. He was going to have a new life on Friday. But it was not going to be in a mansion in Alpharetta. It was going to be in the ruins of the life he had just set on fire. I sat down on the mattress and smoothed the blanket over my knees. I was not angry anymore. Anger was a hot passion, a living thing. This was something else. This was geology. This was the slow crushing weight of tectonic plates shifting. I was the earthquake, and they were just the fragile little houses built on the fault line. I waited for Friday. Thursday morning arrived with a deceptive calm. The house was quiet, save for the hum of the refrigerator upstairs and the occasional creak of floorboards as Brittany paced the kitchen. I sat on my cot in the basement, wrapped in my thin wool blanket, listening to the rhythm of her anxiety. She was nervous about the move on Friday. She was worried about the logistics of disposing of an old man without leaving a paper trail. She did not know that the paper trail was already being written and the author was standing on her front porch. At 10 o'clock sharp, a knock echoed through the house. It was not the polite tap of a neighbor or the rhythmic pound of a delivery driver. It was 3 hard, distinctive raps, the knock of authority. I heard Brittany's heels click rapidly across the hardwood floor. She opened the door. "Can I help you?" Her voice was sharp, defensive. "Good morning, ma'am. I am Arthur Vance from the Department of Elder Protection. We received an anonymous tip regarding the welfare of a senior citizen residing at this address. Mr. Ethan Carter. I am here to conduct a wellness check." The voice was unmistakable to me. It was Solomon. But he had stripped away the smooth baritone of the corporate shark and replaced it with the flat, nasally tone of a weary bureaucrat. I could picture him perfectly. He would be wearing a brown corduroy jacket, patches on the elbows, thick glasses that magnified his eyes, and holding a battered clipboard. He was a master of theater. I heard Brittany gasp. "A tip. That is ridiculous. My father-in-law is fine. He is happy. We take excellent care of him. You must have the wrong house. I am afraid not, Mrs. Carter." The report was quite specific. "May I come in, or shall I return with a police escort?" There was a pause. I could feel Brittany weighing her options. If she refused, the police would come. If she let him in, she had to manage the stage. "Of course," she said, her voice pitching up into a forced sweetness. "Come in, please. You have to understand, Ethan is, well, he is a bit confused lately. He tells stories, he forgets things. We do our best, but it is a challenge." I heard heavy footsteps enter the foyer. "I understand," Solomon said dryly. "I just need to see him. And his living quarters. Right this way." He prefers the basement apartment. It is quieter for him, more private. She was leading him to the slaughterhouse and trying to sell it as a spa. I stood up and shuffled to the center of the room. I let the blanket hang loose around my shoulders. I hunched my back. I practiced my tremors. The door at the top of the stairs opened. Light flooded down, blinding me for a second. Ethan Brittany called out, her voice laced with a warning edge. "We have a visitor, a nice man from the city. Be polite." She descended the stairs, first blocking Solomon's view as she tried to kick a pile of dirty laundry out of the way. But Solomon was right behind her. He stepped onto the concrete floor and stopped. He did not look at me. He looked at the room. He took a device from his pocket. It was a laser thermometer. He pointed it at the wall. He pointed it at my bed. He pointed it at the air in front of my face. 48 degrees, he said. His voice was flat, emotionless. "The legal minimum for a rental unit is 68 degrees. Brittany laughed, a nervous, brittle sound. "Oh, the heater just went out yesterday. We have a repairman coming this afternoon. We gave him extra blankets. He loves the cold, actually. Says it reminds him of his trucking days." "Right, Ethan." She looked at me, her eyes wide and manic, silently daring me to contradict her. I shivered. I let my teeth chatter audibly. "Cold," I whispered. "So cold." Solomon made a note on his clipboard. The scratching of the pen was loud in the silence. "He says he is cold, Mrs. Carter, and I see only one thin blanket." "He throws them off," Brittany lied quickly. "He gets night sweats. It is a medical condition." Solomon did not respond. He walked deeper into the room, his eyes scanning every corner. He looked at the peeling paint. He looked at the single bare bulb hanging from the ceiling. He looked at the bucket in the corner that I used when they locked the door and I could not get to the bathroom. Then he stopped at the small table near the bed. On the table sat my breakfast, or what passed for it. 2 slices of dry toast and a cup of lukewarm water. But it was not on a plate. It was in a bowl, a red plastic bowl, with the name Killer printed on the side in black letters. It was an old dog bowl left over from a German shepherd they had owned years ago. Brittany had started using it for me 3 days ago, claiming she did not want me breaking her good china with my shaking hands. Solomon stared at the bowl. He reached out and touched the rim with the tip of his pen. "Is this a pet bowl, Mrs. Carter?" he asked. Brittany turned pale. In the dim light, her skin looked like wax. "No. I mean, yes, it was. But it is clean. He prefers it. The high sides help him scoop the food. He has tremors. It is an adaptive device. We read about it online. It helps him maintain his dignity." "Dignity," Solomon repeated. He looked at me. I was standing there in my rags shaking, staring at the dog bowl that my daughter-in-law claimed gave me dignity. I looked at Solomon. For a split second, his eyes met mine behind the thick glasses. There was no pity in them. There was a cold fury, a burning rage that told me he wanted to burn this house to the ground right now. But he held it back. He was a professional. Adaptive device, he said, writing again. Dog bowl, note made. He turned back to Brittany, and the bruise on his arm. I looked down. There was a dark purple bruise on my forearm where Tyrell had grabbed me yesterday when I tried to go upstairs to use the phone. He falls, Brittany blurted out. He is clumsy. We try to catch him, but he is heavy. Solomon stepped closer to me. He lifted my arm gently. He inspected the bruise. This is a grip mark, Mrs. Carter. 4 fingers and a thumb. Someone grabbed him. Hard. Brittany was hyperventilating now. I could hear her breath coming in short, sharp gasps. He must have done it to himself. He gets confused. He gets aggressive. Sometimes we have to restrain him for his own safety. Solomon dropped my arm. He looked at Brittany. He looked at her silk blouse and her diamond earrings. Then he looked at the damp concrete floor. I have seen enough, he said. He turned and walked toward the stairs. Brittany scrambled after him, desperate to salvage the narrative. Wait. You do not understand. You are seeing this out of context. We love him. We are doing everything we can. It is just so hard. We are exhausted. You have to put this in your report. We are good people. Solomon did not stop. He marched up the stairs and into the kitchen. Tyrell was there. He had come home for lunch, or perhaps he had been hiding upstairs the whole time, afraid to face the music. He saw Solomon coming out of the basement, saw the grim expression on his face, and the panic on Brittany S. Tyrell stepped forward, blocking the path to the front door. He put on his best corporate smile, the one he used when he was trying to upsell a client. Sir, he said, extending a hand, I am Tyrell Carter, Ethan S.'s son. I hope everything is satisfactory. My wife tends to worry, but really Dad is fine. Solomon ignored the hand. Mr. Carter, I have found evidence of hypothermia, malnutrition, and potential physical abuse. The living conditions are substandard. The sanitation is non-existent. And your father is eating out of a dog bowl. Tyrell S.'s smile faltered, but he did not break. He reached into his back pocket and pulled out his wallet. He opened it and thumbed through the bills. Look, I know how it looks, he said, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial whisper. You are a busy man, Mr. Vance. You see a lot of sad cases. Maybe things are a little messy right now. We are in the middle of a transition. But I am sure we can work this out. I am sure there is a way to smooth over the report. He pulled out a stack of bills. 5 $100 bills. $500. He folded them into a small square and held them out to Solomon. Just for your time, Tyrell said. For gas money, to make sure the paperwork does not get lost in the shuffle. Solomon looked at the money. He looked at it like it was a dead rat. $500, he said loudly. Tyrell flinched. Shh, not so loud. Just take it. Solomon looked Tyrell in the eye. You are offering a state official a bribe to overlook the abuse of a senior citizen. That is a felony, Mr. Carter. On top of the other potential felonies I have witnessed today. Tyrell yanked his hand back, stuffing the money into his pocket as if it were burning him. I just meant it was a donation. It was for the department. Solomon leaned in close. He was taller than Tyrell, broader in the shoulders. Even in his disguise, he radiated power. I suggest you spend that money on a lawyer, Mr. Carter, or perhaps on a heating repairman, because I will be filing my report immediately. And when the state moves, it moves quickly. He stepped around Tyrell and opened the front door. The bright sunlight of the afternoon spilled into the dark foyer. Have a nice day, Solomon said. He walked out. Tyrell and Brittany stood in the hallway, frozen. They looked at each other. The color had drained from both their faces. He is going to report us, Brittany whispered. They are going to come. They are going to take the house. Tyrell ran a hand over his face, wiping away sweat. No, he said, his voice shaking. No. Bureaucracy is slow. It takes weeks for them to process a report. We have time. Time for what Brittany asked. Time to get rid of him, Tyrell said. We cannot wait for the state. We have to move him now, today. If he is not here when they come back, there is no case. We claim he wandered off. We claim we sent him to a private facility. We just need him gone. He turned and looked at the basement door. Pack his things, Tyrell ordered. Call the movers. I do not care what it costs. Get a van. We are driving him to Green Valley tonight. I heard them from the bottom of the stairs. I heard the panic in their voices. They thought they were reacting. They thought they were taking control. They did not know they were dancing to my tune. I sat on my bed and waited. Solomon had played his part perfectly. The trap was sprung. Now it was time for the final act. The chaos began exactly 3 minutes after Solomon left. I heard the lock on the basement door disengage with a violence that rattled the frame. Brittany did not walk down the stairs. She stormed down. Her footsteps were heavy, frantic, and erratic. She was no longer the composed social climber trying to impress the neighbors. She was a cornered animal, terrified of the cage she saw closing around her. "Get up!" she screamed, her voice shrill and breaking. "Get up right now!" She was holding a black garbage bag in one hand and my old canvas suitcase in the other. She threw the suitcase at my feet. It hit the concrete with a dull thud, kicking up dust. "Pack," she ordered. "You are leaving. Now." I sat up slowly. I did not hurry. My lack of urgency seemed to infuriate her even more. She grabbed the garbage bag and began tearing open my drawers. She pulled out my socks, my underwear, my faded flannel shirts, and shoved them into the bag. She did not fold them. She did not care. To her, these were not my belongings. They were evidence. They were the incriminating artifacts of the crime she had committed against me, and she wanted them gone. "You did this," she hissed, glaring at me as she swept my toiletries into the trash bag. "You called them, didn't you? You called the state. You tried to ruin us, after everything we did for you, after we gave you a roof over your head." I looked at her calmly. "I did not call anyone, Brittany," I said, my voice steady. "The neighbors have eyes. People talk. Perhaps they saw how thin I was getting." She let out a sound of pure frustration. "Liar," she spat. "You want to destroy Tyrell. You have always been jealous of him. Jealous of his success. Jealous that he made something of himself while you just drove trucks. Well, you are not going to drag him down with you. We are not going to jail because you decided to play the victim." She grabbed the bag and the suitcase and hauled them up the stairs. "Get dressed," she yelled over her shoulder. "If you are not out of this house in 10 minutes, I am calling the police and telling them you attacked me. I will have you arrested, Ethan. Do not test me." I listened to her stomp up into the kitchen. I heard the back door open. I heard the sound of my things hitting the wet grass of the backyard. She wasn't just evicting me. She was trying to erase my existence from the property. I stood up. I walked to the small closet in the corner. It was the only place she hadn't ransacked, probably because she forgot it was there. Inside, hanging in a plastic dry cleaning bag, was my black suit. It was the suit I had worn to Beatrice's funeral. It was the suit I had worn when I signed the papers to incorporate Carter Logistics 40 years ago. It was heavy wool, dark as midnight, and tailored to perfection. It was the uniform of a man who demanded respect. I stripped off the rags I had been wearing, the stained t-shirt and the baggy sweatpants. I washed my face in the small sink, scrubbing away the grime and the act I had maintained for weeks. I shaved quickly but carefully. I put on the white dress shirt. I buttoned the cuffs. I pulled on the trousers. I tightened the belt. I slipped into the jacket. It settled onto my shoulders like armor. I tied my tie a perfect Windsor knot. I looked in the cracked mirror. The old, frail man was gone. The eyes that stared back were hard, clear, and dangerous. Ethan, the burden, was dead. Ethan, the chairman, had returned. I walked up the stairs. The house was silent now. The frantic energy had dissipated, leaving behind a tense, fearful quiet. I walked through the kitchen. I saw the empty space on the counter where the dog bowl had been. Brittany had already hidden it. I opened the back door and stepped out onto the patio. My clothes were scattered across the lawn. Shirts hung from the bushes. Socks were trampled into the mud. The suitcase lay open and empty, its contents spewed out like guts. It was a scene of total disrespect, a final insult intended to strip me of my last shred of dignity. Tyrell was standing on the porch. He was smoking a cigarette, something I hadn't seen him do in years. His hand was shaking. He looked at the mess on the lawn, and then he looked at me. His eyes widened. He took in the suit. He took in the posture. He took in the way I stood tall and unbowed amidst the wreckage of my belongings. For a second he looked confused, as if he didn't recognize the man standing before him. "Dad," he stammered, "why are you wearing that?" I ignored the question. I walked past him, stepping over a pile of my own undershirts. I walked to the edge of the driveway where the lawn met the street. I turned around and looked at the house. It was a nice house. I had chosen it carefully. I had imagined my grandchildren playing in this yard. I had imagined Thanksgiving dinners in that dining room. Now it was just a building infested with rot. Brittany came out of the house. She stopped next to Tyrell. She saw me in the suit and she laughed. It was a harsh, grating sound. "Look at him," she mocked, pointing a finger. He thinks he is going to a wedding, or maybe a funeral. You look ridiculous, Ethan. Who are you trying to impress? The garbage man. I looked at her. I did not blink. Where is the van, I asked. You said you were moving me. Brittany crossed her arms. Plans changed, she said. The van is too expensive, and frankly, I do not want to share a confined space with you for 2 hours. You can take the bus, or walk. I do not care. Just get off my property. She pointed to the street. Go! She screamed. Get out! I looked at Tyrell. He was looking at his shoes. He took a drag of the cigarette and flicked the ash onto the porch I had paid for. Tyrell, I said. My voice was low, but it carried across the yard with the weight of a gavel strike. Look at me, son. He raised his head slowly. His eyes were red-rimmed and watery. He looked terrified. He looked weak. This is it, I said. This is the moment. Once I step off this curb, there is no coming back. I will walk away and I will never return to this house. You will never see me again as your father. You will only see me as a stranger. I paused, letting the words sink in. Are you sure, Tyrell? Are you absolutely sure this is how you want to end it? Tyrell looked at Brittany. She glared at him silently, daring him to speak silently, threatening him with her anger. Then he looked at the house. He looked at the neighborhood. He looked at the life he thought he was protecting. He looked back at me, and in his eyes I saw the final death of his conscience. It is for the best, Dad, he said, his voice cracking. We cannot handle you anymore. You need professional help. We are doing this for you. Just go. Please. Just go. He turned his back on me. He walked into the house and closed the door. The sound of the latch clicking shut was the final punctuation mark on our relationship. It was over. The son I loved was gone, consumed by the coward I saw before me. Brittany smirked. You heard him, she said triumphantly. He chose. Now leave. Take your trash and get out of my sight. I nodded slowly. Very well, I said. I turned away from the house. I did not pick up the clothes. I left the shirts in the mud. I left the socks in the grass. I left the empty suitcase open to the sky. I did not need them where I was going. They were the costumes of a role I was no longer playing. I walked to the curb. I stood there looking down the long street lined with oak trees. The neighbors were watching. I could see the curtains twitching in the house across the street. I could see Mrs. Higgins peering out from behind her blinds. They had heard the screaming. They had seen the clothes flying. They were witnessing the fall of Ethan Carter, or so they thought. I checked my watch. It was an old Timex I wore for the act, but the time was accurate. It was 10:30 a.m., right on time. At the end of the block, a shape turned the corner. It was long and sleek and black. It moved with a silent, predatory grace. The sunlight glinted off the polished chrome grille. It was a Lincoln Continental, not a rental, not a taxi. It was a custom armored executive sedan with tinted windows so dark they looked like ink. It rolled down the street like a shark gliding through deep water. I heard the front door open behind me. Brittany had come back out, probably to yell at me for loitering. What are you waiting for? She screeched. A bus. The stop is 2 blocks that way. Move. The Lincoln slowed. It pulled up to the curb right in front of me. The engine purred, a low, powerful rumble that vibrated in your chest. Brittany stopped talking. Her mouth hung open. She stared at the car. It was out of place in this neighborhood of leased SUVs and sensible sedans. It was a vehicle that screamed power and money. Old money. Serious money. The rear door of the Lincoln opened. A man stepped out. He was huge, easily 6'5", built like a linebacker in a suit that cost more than Tyrell's car. He wore dark sunglasses and an earpiece. He walked around the car and stood in front of me. He did not look at the clothes on the lawn. He did not look at the screaming woman on the porch. He looked only at me. He bowed. It was a slight, respectful bow of the head. "Good morning, Mr. Chairman," he said, his voice deep and respectful. "Good morning, Marcus," I replied. Marcus reached out and opened the rear door for me, holding it wide. The interior was cream leather and walnut wood. A bottle of sparkling water and a crystal glass waited in the cup holder. I turned back to the house one last time. Brittany was frozen on the porch. Her eyes were bulging. She looked from the car to me and back to the car. Her brain was trying to process the data and failing. The old man in the basement, the billionaire S car, the bodyguard. It did not compute. Tyrell had come back out, drawn by the silence. He stood next to her. His cigarette fell from his lips and landed on the doormat unnoticed. "Dad," he whispered. "Dad, whose car is that?" I looked at him. I looked at the fear and confusion dawning on his face. "You wanted me to leave Tyrell," I said, my voice carrying clearly across the lawn. "You wanted me to find somewhere else to live." I stepped toward the car. "I am granting your wish." I got into the back seat. The leather was soft and cool. The air conditioning smelled of vanilla and power. Marcus closed the door. The sound was solid, heavy, and final. It shut out the noise of the suburbs. It shut out the whining of my daughter-in-law. It shut out the weakness of my son. I lowered the window just an inch. Brittany and Tyrell were running down the driveway now, stumbling over my discarded clothes. "Wait," Tyrell yelled. "Dad, wait." "What is going on?" Marcus got into the driver's seat. He looked at me in the rearview mirror. "Where to, sir?" he asked. "Take me to the tower, Marcus," I said. The engine growled. The car pulled away from the curb, smoothly, effortlessly, leaving my son and his wife standing in the middle of the street, surrounded by dirty laundry, staring at the taillights of the future they had just thrown away. The window hummed as it slid down another few inches, revealing my face to the two people panting on the curb. Brittany and Tyrell stood there, framed by the dirty laundry they had thrown onto the lawn, looking like refugees from a disaster of their own making. I watched them with a detached curiosity. The panic in their eyes was real, but it was not the panic of losing a father. It was the panic of losing an asset. They were trying to calculate the value of the car, the cost of the suit, and the identity of the driver. Their mental abacus was clicking furiously, trying to reconcile the pauper in the basement with the king in the limousine. "Get in," I said. My voice was not the raspy whisper I had used for months. It was a command, low resonant and leaving no room for argument. Brittany blinked, her mouth opening and closing like a fish on a dock. "Get in," she repeated, her voice high and incredulous. "Into that. Whose car is this, Ethan? Did you steal it? Is this some kind of prank?" "We have unfinished business," I said, ignoring her questions. "You wanted me out. I am out. But there are papers to sign, final settlements regarding the accounts you were so interested in, unless you want to leave things unresolved." I saw the greed flicker in her eyes. It was a reflex as automatic as breathing. She heard the word settlements, and her mind immediately jumped to money. She thought I was going to hand over the rest of the cash I had used to buy the Rolex. She thought this was my way of buying their forgiveness, of buying my way back into the warmth of the house. Tyrell looked at the car with a different kind of hunger. He was looking at the chrome, the tinted glass, the sheer mass of the vehicle. He was a man who measured worth in horsepower and leather, and this car was worth more than his life. "Dad," he said, stepping forward, "we just want to talk. We can talk inside. We will talk on the way," I said. Marcus unlocked the doors. There was a heavy mechanical thud as the locks disengaged. I gestured to the empty seats opposite me. "Get in," I repeated. "Or I leave, and the opportunity leaves with me." Brittany grabbed Tyrell's arm. Her nails dug into his jacket. "Get in," she hissed under her breath, loud enough for me to hear. "He probably has the cash on him. We need to get that money before he does something stupid with it." They scrambled for the door. Tyrell opened it, and the smell of their desperation wafted in, mixing poorly with the scent of fine leather and conditioned air. They climbed in awkwardly, stumbling over their own feet, awed by the plush interior. They sat on the bench seat facing me, looking small and out of place, like children allowed to sit at the adults' table for the first time. Marcus closed the door. The silence was instantaneous. The world outside, the screaming neighbors, the wind, the shame of the eviction vanished. We were in a capsule of absolute power. "Drive, Marcus," I said into the intercom. The Lincoln surged forward. It did not jerk or rumble. It simply began to exist in a different location. We glided away from the curb, leaving the house and the scattered clothes behind. I pressed a button on the armrest. A panel slid open, revealing a crystal decanter and 2 heavy tumblers. The amber liquid inside sloshed gently as the car turned the corner. Brittany stared at the bar. She stared at my hands as I reached out and lifted the decanter. My hands were steady. There was no tremor, no shake, no sign of the infirmity I had feigned for weeks. I poured a measure of the liquid into a glass. It was a 30-year-old single malt scotch, smooth as silk and smoky as a peat fire. I took a sip, letting the warmth spread through my chest. I looked at them over the rim of the glass. "You seem surprised," I said. Dad, Tyrell whispered. Your hands. You aren't shaking." I lowered the glass. I set it down on the walnut console with a soft click. I never shook, Tyrell, I said. I shook because you expected me to shake. I shook because it made you feel powerful to see me weak. It is amazing what the human body can do when it needs to survive a predator. Brittany bristled, her natural arrogance trying to reassert itself in the face of my transformation. Stop playing games, Ethan, she snapped, though her voice lacked its usual bite. What is going on? Who paid for this car? Did you spend the rest of your savings on a rental just to show off? That money was for us, for your care. I laughed. It was a dry, dark sound. My savings, I asked. You mean the $50,000 in the passbook? The money you thought was my entire life's work. I leaned forward. The space between us shrank. The air in the car seemed to grow heavier, charged with the static of my authority. That was petty cash, Brittany. That was the money I keep in a drawer for rainy days. That was not my savings. That was bait. Bait, she breathed. And you took it, I said. You took it hook, line, and sinker. You stole. You lied. You plotted. You looked at a man you thought was helpless, and you decided to pick his bones clean. I poured another splash of scotch. I swirled it, looking at the golden vortex. You judged me by my clothes, I continued. You judged me by my silence. You thought because I drove a truck for 40 years that I was simple. You thought because I lived in a basement that I was poor. You forgot the first rule of wealth, Tyrell. I looked at my son. He was pale, sweating his eyes wide and terrified. What rule? He croaked. True wealth does not scream, I said. It whispers. And you two were too loud to hear it. The car accelerated, merging onto the highway. We were heading toward the city, toward the skyline that rose like a jagged range of glass and steel against the horizon. Where are we going? Tyrell asked, his voice trembling. This isn't the way to the bank. We are going to my office, I said. Office, Brittany scoffed, trying to find her footing. What office? The dispatch center. Are you going to introduce us to your dispatcher friends? I ignored her. I pressed a button and the privacy partition between us and the driver lowered a few inches. Marcus, I said, how is the stock performing today? Up 3 points, sir, Marcus replied, his voice calm and professional. The merger news from the West Coast division has been received well by the market. Excellent, I said. Raise the partition. The glass slid back up. Brittany stared at me. Merger, she whispered. What merger? I sat back, crossing my legs. I adjusted the cuff of my jacket, revealing the Patek Philippe watch I had worn for special occasions for 20 years. It was worth more than their car. You will see, I said. We entered the city. The shadows of the skyscrapers fell over the car. We wove through the traffic, moving with the assurance of a vehicle that knows it owns the road. We turned onto Peachtree Street, the heart of the financial district. The car slowed. We approached a massive glass tower that dominated the block. It was 60 stories of blue reflective glass soaring into the clouds. A plaza with fountains and sculptures fronted the building. It was a fortress of commerce. Tyrell looked out the window. He knew this building. Everyone in Atlanta knew this building. He had applied for a junior management position here 5 years ago. He had been rejected. He had applied again 3 years ago. Rejected again. He had told me about it, complaining over dinner that the company was an exclusive club that didn't hire people like him. He looked at the massive steel letters mounted on the granite wall of the plaza. CARTERLOGISTICS, Carter Logistics. He froze. His eyes locked on the name. Then they darted to me, then back to the name. The gears in his mind were grinding, trying to bridge the gap between the father he knew and the name on the building. Carter, he whispered. Carter Logistics. The car turned into the circular driveway reserved for executives. Security guards in dark suits stepped forward. They did not stop the car. They saluted. The Lincoln came to a smooth halt right in front of the main glass doors. I finished my scotch. I set the glass down. Brittany looked out the window, her mouth agape. Why are we here? She asked, her voice trembling with a dawning horror. This is a Fortune 500 company, Ethan. We can't just park here. They will tow us. I looked at her. I looked at the fear in her eyes, the sudden realization that she was a very small fish who had just swum into the mouth of a whale. They will not tow us, I said. I opened the door. The sounds of the city rushed in, but they were distant, respectful. Tyrell was still staring at the sign. His face was gray. He looked like a man who had just seen a ghost. Dad, he said, his voice barely audible. Carter. That is, that is a common name. I stepped out of the car. I stood up to my full height, smoothing my jacket. I looked down at my son huddled in the back seat of my car in front of my building. "It is my name, son," I said. I turned and walked toward the revolving doors. "Come," I called back to them. "Do not make me wait." The board does not like to be kept waiting. I did not look back to see if they followed. I knew they would. Gravity was pulling them now, the gravity of power. They were caught in my orbit, and they were about to crash into the surface. The revolving doors spun with a heavy, hushed whoosh, sealing away the noise of the street and depositing us into a cathedral of commerce. The lobby of Carter Logistics Plaza was a cavernous space of Italian marble and soaring glass walls that stretched up 3 stories to a vaulted ceiling. The air was cool and smelled of expensive polish and ambition. It was a space designed to intimidate, to impress, and to declare dominance. I walked onto the white marble floor, my footsteps clicking rhythmically, a sound I had not made in years. Behind me, I heard the hesitant scuffling of Tyrell and Brittany. They walked close together, huddled like children entering a haunted house. They looked up at the massive digital ticker tape running along the mezzanine level, displaying the company's stock price in glowing green numbers. They looked at the security desk, which was manned not by rent-a-cops, but by armed professionals in dark suits. As I moved toward the center of the atrium, the hum of the lobby changed. It did not go silent. It shifted. The casual chatter of employees on their coffee breaks stopped. Heads turned. Phones were lowered. A ripple of recognition spread outward from the center of the room like a wave. A young man in a sharp blue suit, a junior analyst by the look of him, was walking toward the exit with a coffee in hand. He looked up, saw me, and froze. His eyes went wide. He quickly shifted his cup to his left hand and straightened his tie. He stepped aside, bowing his head slightly. "Good morning, Mr. Chairman," he said, his voice respectful and clear. I nodded. "Good morning, son." That was the spark. Suddenly, the entire lobby seemed to mobilize. The security guards at the main desk stepped out from behind their stations, standing at attention. The receptionist, a woman named Sarah, who had been with the company for 15 years, stood up and smoothed her skirt. "Welcome back, Mr. Carter." Sarah called out, her smile genuine and warm. "We have missed you, sir." "Thank you, Sarah," I replied, not breaking my stride. "Is the boardroom prepped?" "It is waiting for you, sir," she confirmed. I walked past a group of executives near the elevators. They were men and women in power suits, people who controlled budgets larger than the GDP of small nations. When they saw me, they stopped their conversation immediately. They turned and acknowledged me with nods of deep respect. There was no mockery here. There was no whispering about the old man. Here I was, the sun around which their careers orbited. I heard a gasp behind me. It was Brittany. She had stopped walking. She was staring at a large bronze bust on a pedestal near the fountain. It was a sculpture of a man in his prime, strong-jawed and determined. The plaque beneath it read, "Ethan Carter, founder and chairman." Visionary. She looked from the bronze face to my face. The resemblance was undeniable. The truth was hitting her not as a thought, but as a physical blow. Her legs wobbled. She reached out and grabbed Tyrell's arm to steady herself, her fingernails digging into his sleeve. Tyrell was not looking at the statue. He was looking at the people. He was looking at the respect in their eyes. He was seeing the way they deferred to me, the way they made a path for me without being asked. He was realizing that the man he had treated as a nuisance, the man he had banished to a damp basement, was a god in this world. His face was the color of old ash. His lips moved, but no sound came out. He looked like he was going to vomit. The realization was too big for him. It was rewriting his entire history. Every memory of me driving a truck, every memory of my grease-stained hands was now being overlaid with this reality. He realized that my labor had not been a necessity of poverty, but the foundation of an empire. "Come," I said without turning around. "The elevator is this way." I led them past the bank of public elevators to a single set of doors at the far end of the hall. There was no call button. There was only a biometric scanner. I placed my hand on the panel. A beam of blue light scanned my palm. "Access granted, Chairman Carter," a computerized voice announced. The doors slid open, revealing an interior of polished brass and mahogany. I stepped inside. Tyrell and Brittany followed me, their movements jerky and uncoordinated. They stepped into the elevator as if they were stepping onto the gallows. The doors closed, shutting out the lobby. We were alone in the small, luxurious box. The silence was thick, heavy enough to choke on. I pressed the button for the 60th floor. The elevator began to rise. It was smooth, so smooth you could barely feel the movement, but the numbers on the display ticked upward rapidly. Floor 10, floor 20, floor 30. Brittany was breathing fast, shallow gasps. She was pressed into the corner as far away from me as she could get. She looked at my suit, then at my watch, then at my face. She was trying to find the lie. She was desperate to find the trick. This is a joke, right? She whispered, her voice trembling. You hired actors. This is some sick, elaborate prank to teach us a lesson. You cannot own this. You are Ethan. You eat out of a dog bowl. I looked at her reflection in the brass doors. I ate out of a dog bowl because you put my food in it, Brittany, I said calmly. I lived in a basement because you put me there. Do not confuse my tolerance with my station. Floor 40. Floor 50. Tyrell spoke then. His voice was a ghost of a sound. I applied here, he said, staring at the floor numbers. 5 years ago, I applied for a mid-level management job in logistics. I didn't even get an interview. I got a rejection letter 2 days later. I know, I said. He looked at me, his eyes wide with betrayal. You knew, he asked. I saw the application, Tyrell, I said. It came across my desk. I review all management hires. You rejected me, he whispered. Your own son. I did not reject my son, I said, turning to face him. I rejected an applicant who was underqualified, entitled, and had a history of job hopping. I rejected a man who thought he deserved a corner office because of his last name, not his work ethic. If you had applied for a driver position or a warehouse job, I would have hired you. I would have let you work your way up. But you wanted to start at the top. And in this building, nobody starts at the top except me. The elevator chimed. Floor 60. The doors opened. We stepped out into the executive penthouse. The carpet was thick plush wool. The walls were lined with original art. The view through the floor-to-ceiling windows was breathtaking. The entire city of Atlanta lay spread out beneath us, a sprawling grid of roads and trees and buildings. From this height, the cars looked like toys. The people were invisible. This was the view of a king. I walked down the long hallway toward the double doors at the end. Tyrell and Brittany trailed behind me, their footsteps silent on the carpet. They looked around with wide, fearful eyes, taking in the opulence. This was the wealth they had craved. This was the status they had killed their souls to achieve. And it had been right there under their noses the whole time, hidden behind a flannel shirt and a humble demeanor. I pushed open the doors to the boardroom. It was a massive room dominated by a table made from a single slab of black walnut 20 feet long. 20 leather chairs surrounded it. At the far end stood the chairman's chair, high-backed and imposing. The walls were glass. The city was our wallpaper. I walked to the head of the table. I did not sit immediately. I stood behind the chair, my hands resting on the leather. I looked at the 2 empty chairs at the opposite end of the table, the visitor seats. Sit, I commanded. They sat. They collapsed into the chairs, really their legs giving out. They looked small at the end of that long table. They looked insignificant. I sat down. I leaned back, crossing my hands over my chest. I waited. The silence stretched. I let them stew in it. I let them look at the city below and realize how far they had fallen. I let them look at me and realize how badly they had miscalculated. Then the side door opened. A man walked in. He was carrying a thick leather binder. He was wearing a navy blue suit that cost more than Tyrell's annual salary. His hair was silver, his glasses rimless and sharp. He walked with the confident stride of a man who knows the law is a weapon, and he is the marksman. Brittany gasped. Her hand flew to her mouth. Mr. Vance, she stammered. The social worker. The man stopped at the side of the table. He placed the binder down with a solid thud. He looked at Brittany and smiled a thin, shark-like smile. Not exactly Mrs. Carter, he said, his voice the smooth baritone I knew so well, not the nasally whine he had used yesterday. He opened the binder. He took out a gold fountain pen. Allow me to reintroduce myself, he said. I am Solomon Davis, Director of Legal Affairs for Carter Logistics, and the personal attorney to Mr. Ethan Carter for the last 35 years. He looked at Tyrell, who was staring at him in horror. And I must say, Mr. Carter, he added, his eyes glinting behind the lenses, your bribe of $500 was frankly insulting. My hourly rate is $2,000. Solomon slid the open binder across the long table. It stopped perfectly in front of Tyrell. "We have a lot to discuss," Solomon said. "Shall we begin with the eviction or the embezzlement charges?" I watched them. I watched the blood drain from their faces until they looked like ghosts. I watched the reality of their situation crash down on them like a collapsing building. The trap was not just shut, it was welded tight, and they were inside with the monster they had created. Solomon tapped a single key on his slim laptop. The glass wall behind me, which had been offering a panoramic view of the Atlanta skyline, suddenly frosted over, turning opaque. A moment later, a projector hummed to life, and a spreadsheet appeared on the glass. It was a sea of numbers, dense and complex columns of assets and valuations that scrolled down for what seemed like forever. This is the consolidated balance sheet for Carter Logistics and its subsidiaries. Solomon began, his voice devoid of theatricality, which made the numbers even more terrifying. As of this morning, the company operates a fleet of 550 Class A commercial trucks. We own 3 million square feet of warehousing space across the Southeast. We hold exclusive government contracts for interstate transport of hazardous materials. He pointed a laser pointer at a figure in the bottom right corner. This is the current valuation of the company's private equity holdings, $480 million, and this number here is the liquid cash reserve currently held in the chairman's personal trust, $22 million. Brittany made a sound like a dying animal. It was a whimper, a gasp, and a sob all rolled into one. She stared at the screen, her eyes tracing the zeros. She was doing the math in her head. She was calculating the percentage of that fortune she might have had access to if she had just been kind, if she had just brought me a blanket, if she had just treated me like a human being. The realization was crushing her physically. She slumped in her chair, her face turning a sickly shade of green. Tyrell was not looking at the numbers. He was looking at me. He was looking at the father he had ignored for decades, the father he had treated as an embarrassment. He was realizing that the man who had silently eaten dinner at the end of his table was the architect of an empire he could not even comprehend. "You," Tyrell whispered. "You built all this while driving a truck." "I drove the first truck," I said, my voice cutting through the silence. "Then I bought a second. Then a third. I built this brick by brick, mile by mile, while you were complaining that your allowance was too small. I built this so my family would never know hunger. I built this so you would have choices. And you chose poorly." Solomon cleared his throat, drawing their attention back to the table. "While the corporate assets are impressive, they are shielded within a complex corporate structure," Solomon said. "However, we are here to discuss a more personal asset, specifically the residential property located at 42 Oak Creek Drive, the house you currently occupy." Brittany sat up straighter, clutching at straws. "That is our house," she said, her voice trembling but defiant. "That is the one thing you cannot touch, Ethan. Tyrell's name is on the deed. It was a wedding gift. You said so yourself. You cannot take back a gift. We have rights. It is marital property." Solomon smiled. It was not a nice smile. It was the smile of a wolf looking at a lamb that had wandered into its den. "Ah, yes. The deed," Solomon said. He opened the binder and pulled out a document. It was yellowed with age, the edges crisp. He slid it across the polished walnut table toward Tyrell. "Tell me, Mr. Carter, have you ever actually read the deed to your house? I mean, really read it. Not just the front page with your name on it, but the addendums, the trust riders." Tyrell looked down at the paper. His hands were shaking so hard he could barely hold it steady. I signed it at the closing," he stammered. "The lawyer said it was standard." "Standard for a Carter Trust property, perhaps?" Solomon corrected. "Look at Clause 4, Section A. Read it aloud, please." Tyrell squinted at the text. He licked his dry lips. The property is held in trust by the Carter Family Revocable Trust." He read, his voice barely a whisper. "The occupant, Tyrell Carter, is designated as a beneficiary tenant." "Keep reading," Solomon commanded. "The terms of the tenancy." Tyrell swallowed hard. "The beneficiary tenant shall lease the property for the sum of $1 per annum. The lease is lifetime renewable annually, subject to the good conduct and guardian provisions." Good conduct and guardian, Brittany interrupted. What the hell is that? What does that mean? It means, Solomon said, leaning forward, his eyes locking onto hers, that you do not own that house. You never have. The Carter Trust owns the house. Tyrell is simply a tenant who pays $1 a year. It is a charity lease, Mrs. Carter, a gift of occupancy, not ownership. He tapped the document with his finger. And the guardian provision is quite specific. It states that the beneficiary tenant must provide a safe, respectful, and habitable environment for the grantor of the trust should the grantor choose to reside on the premises. The grantor, of course, is Mr. Ethan Carter. The silence that filled the room was absolute. It was the silence of a guillotine blade hanging at the top of its arc. Brittany looked at me. The color drained from her face, leaving her looking like a wax doll. "You mean," she whispered, "you mean we were evicting the landlord?" I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table. "You tried to charge me rent," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "You tried to charge me $3,000 a month to live in a basement that I own, in a house that I built, on land that I paid for. You violated the guardian provision." Solomon stated, his voice ringing like a bell, "by cutting off the heat, by withholding food, by attempting to coerce the grantor into a state facility. These are not just moral failings, Mr. and Mrs. Carter. These are breaches of contract, fundamental breaches." He pulled another document from the binder. It was a single sheet of paper, crisp and white with a red stamp at the bottom. "This is a notice of lease termination," Solomon said. "It was filed with the county clerk at 9 a.m. this morning. Because you violated the terms of the trust, the lease is void effective immediately. The property reverts to the full control of the trust." Tyrell dropped the deed. It fluttered to the table like a dead bird. "Void," he choked out. But where will we go? That is our home." "It was your home," I corrected him. "It was a sanctuary I provided for you, a place to raise a family. But you turned it into a prison. You turned it into a place of abuse, and I do not allow abuse on my property." Solomon looked at his watch. A platinum Rolex that put Tyrell's gaudy timepiece to shame. "The eviction team should be arriving right about now," he said casually. "Eviction team!" Brittany shrieked. She stood up, knocking her chair back. It hit the window with a loud crack. "What do you mean, eviction team? My clothes, my jewelry, my things are in that house. You cannot just throw us out. We have rights. We have tenant rights. You have to give us 30 days' notice. You have to go to court." Solomon shook his head slowly, almost pityingly. "If you were a normal tenant paying market rent, yes," Solomon said. "But you are not. You are a beneficiary of a trust, and the trust documents which Tyrell signed voluntarily include a waiver of standard eviction protocols in the event of gross misconduct or elder abuse. You waived your rights when you signed the contract, Brittany, and you sealed your fate when you locked your father in a freezing basement." He pressed a button on the remote. The screen on the wall changed. It showed a live feed from a security camera. It was the house. A large moving truck was parked in the driveway, the same driveway where I had stood in the rain. 4 men in uniforms were carrying furniture out of the front door. They were moving efficiently, quickly. They were carrying the white sofa Brittany loved so much. They were carrying the big flat-screen television, but they were not putting them in the truck. They were placing them on the curb, right next to the spot where the garbage truck had crushed my wife's chair. "They are putting our stuff on the street," Brittany screamed, grabbing her hair. "Tyrell, do something. They are throwing our life away. Stop them." Tyrell did not move. He stared at the screen, watching his life being dismantled piece by piece. He saw his golf clubs being leaned against a mailbox. He saw his expensive espresso machine being set down on the asphalt. "It is raining," I said calmly, looking at the screen. "Just a drizzle. But enough to ruin a white sofa, I imagine." Brittany turned on me. Her face was twisted into a mask of pure hatred. "You monster," she screamed. "You evil, vindictive old man. How could you do this? We are your family." "Family," I repeated. The word tasted like ash. "Family does not feed their father out of a dog bowl, Brittany. Family does not tell their father to die quickly so they can renovate the kitchen." I stood up. The chair scrapped against the floor. "You wanted me out," I said, walking toward the window, looking down at the city. "You got your wish. I am out. And so are you. The house is being secured. The locks are being changed as we speak. By the time you get back there, the perimeter will be fenced. You can collect your personal effects from the curb. I suggest you hurry. It looks like the rain is picking up." Tyrell looked up at me. His eyes were hollow. "Dad," he whispered, "please. We have nowhere to go. We have no savings. You know we have no savings. We will be homeless." I turned and looked at him. I looked at the man who had closed the curtains on me. "There is a shelter on 4th Street, I said. "It is state-funded. It is free. I hear they have soup. It is not much, but it will keep you alive. That is what you offered me, isn't it?" "Green Valley, the state facility." I walked back to the head of the table. "You should go," I said. "The traffic is bad this time of day. You do not want your designer clothes to get wet." Tyrell stood up. His legs were shaking so bad he had to hold on to the table. He looked at Solomon, then at me. He realized there was no negotiation. There was no mercy. The gavel had fallen. He grabbed Brittany's arm. She was still staring at the screen, watching the rain fall on her sofa. "Come on," he said, his voice dead. "We have to go." She let him lead her away. She walked like a zombie, her eyes glazed over with shock. They walked to the door of the boardroom. Before they left, I spoke one last time. "Tyrell." He stopped. He did not turn around. "Do not come back," I said. "The building has facial recognition. If you try to enter the lobby again, security will arrest you for trespassing. You are not welcome at Carter Logistics, and you are not welcome in my life." He nodded once, a small jerky motion. Then he opened the door and they walked out into the hallway, beginning the long descent from the penthouse to the pavement. I watched the door close. I looked at Solomon. He closed the binder. "That is the eviction handled," Sir Solomon said professionally. "Now, about the criminal charges." I sat back down. "Let's proceed," I said. The elevator doors were just beginning to close when a heavy hand interjected, stopping the brass panels from sealing Tyrell and Brittany inside. It was Marcus. He stood there like a wall of granite, his sunglasses reflecting the terrified faces of my son and daughter-in-law. "Mr. Carter is not finished," Marcus rumbled. They were marched back down the hallway. Brittany was hyperventilating, her heels dragging on the plush carpet. Tyrell looked like a man walking to the electric chair. They were pushed back into the boardroom, the heavy double doors sealing them in once again. I had not moved from my seat at the head of the table. I was sipping my water, watching the condensation run down the glass. "Sit," I said. They collapsed back into the chairs they had just vacated. They looked broken. They thought the eviction was the climax. They thought losing the house was the worst thing that could happen to them today. They were wrong. Losing the house was just a civil matter. What came next was criminal. Solomon placed a small black device on the center of the table. It was the digital voice recorder I had kept in my toolbox. He pressed play. The sound quality was crystal clear, amplified by the boardroom's acoustic system. "Die soon." Brittany's voice filled the room, loud and shrill and hateful. "Do us all a favor, Ethan. Die soon so we can finally live. You are a burden. You are a millstone." Brittany flinched as if she had been slapped. She looked at the recorder, then at me, her eyes wide with shock. She heard herself laughing about the dog bowl. She heard herself plotting to cut the heat. She heard Tyrell agreeing to send me to Green Valley. The recording played on. It played the conversation from the kitchen where they discussed selling the house. It played the moment Tyrell agreed to let me rot in a state facility. Solomon stopped the tape. The silence that followed was heavy with the weight of their guilt. In the state of Georgia, Solomon began, his voice clinical and cold. Elder abuse is not just a moral failing. It is a crime. Specifically under Title 30, Chapter 5 of the Official Code of Georgia, depriving an elder of essential services such as heat and food and inflicting mental anguish are felonies. He looked at Brittany. "You told him to die, Mrs. Carter. You consciously deprived him of heat in the winter. You fed him like an animal. We have the recordings. We have the thermometer readings from my inspection. We have the testimony of the neighbor who saw you throwing his clothes. This is a solid case for aggravated abuse. Mandatory minimum sentencing is 5 years. Brittany began to shake. Her arrogance had evaporated, leaving behind a shivering husk of fear. "I did not mean it," she whispered, tears streaming down her face, ruining her makeup. "I was stressed. I was just venting. I would never actually hurt him." You locked him in a freezing basement, Solomon countered. That is hurting him. He turned to Tyrell. But abuse is just the tip of the iceberg. Let us talk about fraud. Solomon opened the binder again. He pulled out the document Tyrell had forced me to sign. The power of attorney. He placed it under the document camera. The signature I had scrawled appeared on the massive screen behind me. ETHANCARTER. The loop on the H was backward. The underline was broken. Do you recognize this signature? Tyrell Solomon asked. Tyrell nodded mute. This is what we call a duress signature, Solomon explained. Mr. Carter and I established this protocol 20 years ago. It is a signal used when the signatory is being coerced or threatened. It legally voids the document immediately. But the act of forcing him to sign it, attempting to use it to seize control of assets valued in the millions, that is attempted grand larceny. And because Carter Logistics engages in interstate commerce, your attempt to seize control of the company constitutes wire fraud and racketeering under federal law. Tyrell looked at the screen. He stared at the loop in the H. He realized that in his arrogance he had missed the very trap that was now snapping his neck. Federal prison, Tyrell Solomon said softly. We are not talking about county jail. We are talking about federal penitentiary, 15 to 20 years, no parole. Tyrell made a sound deep in his throat, a whimper of pure terror. He looked at me. He looked for the father who used to catch him when he fell off his bike. He looked for the man who had paid for his mistakes his whole life. Dad, he pleaded, Dad, you cannot do this. I am your son. You cannot send your son to prison. I looked at him. I saw the little boy in the baseball uniform. I saw the teenager graduating high school. I saw the man who had closed the curtains while I stood in the rain. You stopped being my son when you decided I was disposable, Tyrell, I said, my voice devoid of pity. You decided to trade my life for a house in Alpharetta. You gambled. And you lost. Solomon slid a new document across the table. It was thin, just 2 pages stapled together. This is a confession of guilt and a waiver of claims, Solomon said. It states that you admit to the abuse and the attempted fraud. It states that you waive any and all future claims to the Carter estate. It states that you will never speak to the press or anyone else about the Carter family or business. It is a total and complete severance. He uncapped the gold pen and set it down on the paper. Here is the deal, Solomon said. You sign this, and Mr. Carter will decline to press criminal charges. The evidence goes into a vault. If you ever come near him again, if you ever try to contact him, if you ever speak his name in public, the evidence goes to the district attorney and you go to prison. Or I said, leaning forward, you can refuse. You can walk out of here right now, and Marcus will drive the evidence directly to the FBI field office. The choice hung in the air. Freedom with poverty or prison. Brittany stared at the paper. Her eyes darted from the pen to Tyrell. Sign it, she screamed at him. Sign it, you idiot. Tyrell looked at her. Me, he said. You sign it. This was your idea. You wanted the house. You wanted the money. I told you we should wait. You coward, Brittany shrieked, lunging at him. Her nails raked across his face, leaving angry red welts. You spineless loser. You dragged me into this. You told me he was just a truck driver. You told me he was stupid. Security guards stepped forward, pulling her off him. She was screaming now, a banshee of rage and regret. He made me do it, she yelled at me, struggling against the guard's grip. It was him, Ethan. It was his idea to cut the heat. He said you were tough. He said you would not notice. Please do not send me to jail. I am just a victim here. I watched them. I watched the love they claimed to have for each other disintegrate the moment the pressure was applied. They were rats in a bucket climbing over each other to escape the rising water. Sign, I commanded. Tyrell grabbed the pen. His hand was shaking so bad he tore the paper slightly. He signed. It was a messy scrawl, a signature of defeat. Brittany signed, next weeping hysterically. Solomon took the document. He checked the signatures. He nodded to me. It is done, sir. I stood up. I buttoned my jacket. You are free, I said. You are free of the burden of taking care of me. You are free of the house you could not afford. You are free of the inheritance you did not earn. I walked to the door. Marcus opened it. You have nothing, I said, looking back at them one last time. And you have exactly what you deserve. Get them out of my building, Solomon ordered. I walked out of the boardroom. I did not look back. I heard Brittany sobbing. I heard Tyrell retching. I walked down the hallway toward my office. The office with the view of the city I had built. I felt lighter. The weight of the deception was gone. The rot had been cut out. It was over. I was alone, but I was clean. The descent from the penthouse was silent and swift. 2 security officers flanked Tyrell and Brittany, engaging in a professional march that left no room for resistance. I did not accompany them. I watched on the monitor in the boardroom as they were escorted through the lobby. The employees who had bowed to me earlier now stopped to watch the spectacle. They saw 2 people in expensive clothes looking disheveled and terrified, being removed like trespassers. The whispers began immediately. The rumor mill of Carter Logistics was efficient, and by the time they reached the revolving doors, the entire building knew that the chairman had cleaned house. They stepped out onto the plaza into the humid Atlanta afternoon. The sun was shining now, a cruel spotlight on their humiliation. Brittany adjusted her dress, trying to salvage some shred of dignity. She scanned the circular driveway looking for her car, the white Mercedes SUV that she leased to impress her yoga friends. She spotted it, but it was not parked where they had left it. It was raised at a 45-degree angle, its rear bumper hooked to the winch of a tow truck. Brittany let out a shriek that must have been audible on the 10th floor. She broke away from the security guards and ran toward the truck, her high heels clacking on the pavement. "Stop!" she screamed, waving her arms. "What are you doing?" "That is my car. Put it down. You are scratching the bumper." A man in a grease-stained jumpsuit stepped out from behind the tow truck. He held a clipboard in his hand. He looked bored. He looked like a man who had heard every excuse in the book. "Mrs. Carter?" he asked, checking the paperwork. "Yes, I am." "Mrs. Carter," Brittany yelled, lunging for the door handle. "Unhook my car this instant. I am calling the police." "Go ahead, ma'am," the driver said calmly, blocking her path with his body. "This is a repossession order authorized by the financing bank. The note has been called." "Called?" Brittany stared at him. "We make the payments. It is on auto pay." "The primary guarantor on the loan withdrew his backing 45 minutes ago," the driver explained, tapping the paper with a pen. "Without the guarantor, the interest rate adjusted to the default maximum and the bank exercised its right to immediate reclamation. The vehicle is property of the bank now. Personal items can be retrieved at the impound lot in Decatur on Monday." She looked at the car. She looked at the repo man. Then she spun around and looked up at the tower. She knew. She knew that I had made the call. I had been the invisible CO signer, the secret safety net that allowed them to drive a car they could never afford. And I had just cut the rope. Tyrell caught up to her. He was panting, sweat staining the collar of his shirt. He looked at the tow truck, then at his wife. "They took the car," he said, his voice dull. Brittany turned on him. The rage that had been building since the boardroom finally exploded. It was a nuclear detonation of resentment. "This is your fault," she screamed right in his face. Her voice echoed off the glass walls of the plaza. "You did this. You and your stupid father. You told me he was a nobody. You told me he was a burden. You lied to me, Tyrell. I didn't know," Tyrell pleaded, holding his hands up to defend himself. "I swear, Brittany, I didn't know. You are a loser," she spat. "You are a broke, spineless loser. You have no house, you have no car, you have no job, you have nothing. And you have dragged me down into the gutter with you." She reached into her purse and pulled out her phone. She stabbed at the screen with a manicured nail. "I am calling my mother," she announced. "She is coming to pick me up. And do not think for 1 second that you are coming with me," Brittany Tyrell begged, reaching for her arm. "Please, we are married. We have to stick together." She slapped his hand away. It was the same motion she had used on me at the party, but with 10 times the force. "We are done," she said, cold as ice. "I am filing for divorce in the morning. I am going to sue you for emotional distress. I am going to take whatever scraps you have left. Do not follow me. Do not call me. You are dead to me." She walked away, marching toward the street corner to wait for her ride. She did not look back. Tyrell stood alone in the middle of the plaza. The tow truck finished securing the Mercedes and drove off the chains, rattling a funeral dirge. The security guards retreated inside, their job done. The employees went back to work. He was completely alone. He stood there for a long time. He looked down at his Italian leather shoes scuffed from the pavement. He looked at his hands, empty and shaking. He was a man who had defined himself by what he owned, by where he lived, by who he married. And in the span of 2 hours, all of it had been stripped away. He was not a husband. He was not a homeowner. He was not an executive. He slowly lifted his head. He looked up. He looked up the sheer vertical face of the glass tower. He counted the floors. 10, 20, 30, all the way up to 60. I was standing at the window. I knew he could not see me. To him, the building was just a monolith of reflected sky. But he knew I was there. He knew his father, the man he had tried to bury in a state facility, was looking down on him from the throne of a kingdom he had been too blind to see. He raised a hand. For a moment I thought he might shake his fist. I thought he might scream in anger. But he didn't. He just waved. A small, pathetic wave of surrender. A goodbye to the life he could have had if he had just been a decent man. Then he turned and began to walk. He walked toward the subway station, shoulders slumped, blending into the crowd of strangers. He was just another face in the city now. Anonymous. Forgotten. I turned away from the window. The view of the city no longer held my interest. The drama was over. The stage was cleared. I walked back to the head of the boardroom table. The room was quiet, the air still charged with the energy of the confrontation. Solomon was sitting there organizing the papers back into his binder. He looked up as I approached. "They are gone, sir," he said. "Good," I replied. I sat down in the chairman's chair. It felt comfortable, familiar. It felt like where I belonged. But there was an emptiness in my chest, a hollow space where my son used to be. I had won the war, but the cost of victory was high. I had cut out the cancer, but I had lost a limb in the process. Solomon slid a final document across the table. It was heavy cream-colored paper bound in a blue folder. "The foundation papers, sir," he said softly. "As we discussed." I opened the folder. The text was elegant and precise. "The Beatrice Carter Foundation for Underprivileged Youth." I picked up the gold pen. I looked at the line for the initial endowment. I wrote the number, $22 million. It was the liquid cash I had baited them with. It was the money they had salivated over. Now it would go to children who had nothing. It would build schools. It would pay for scholarships. It would give chances to boys and girls who knew the value of a dollar because they had never seen one. It would create a legacy that Tyrell could never destroy. I signed my name. The loop on the H was perfect. The underline was sharp. It was the signature of a man who was in control. I closed the folder and handed it to Solomon. "File it," I said. "Start the programs immediately." "Yes, Mr. Carter." Solomon stood up. He hesitated for a moment. "Are you all right, sir?" I looked around the empty boardroom. I thought about the basement. I thought about the cold nights. I thought about the red chair in the rain. "I am alone, Solomon," I said. Solomon looked at me with understanding in his eyes. "You are alone, sir," he agreed. "But you are safe, and you are respected. And tonight you will sleep in a bed that you own in a room that is warm." I nodded. "That is enough," I said. "That is enough." I stood up and buttoned my jacket. I walked to the door. "Let's go home, Marcus," I said into the intercom. I walked out of the office, leaving the lights on, leaving the city below to its noise and its hustle. I walked toward the elevator, ready to start the rest of my life. A life without lies, a life without burdens, a life that was finally mine. I learned that blood does not make a family. Loyalty does. My son spent his life chasing the shadow of wealth, the watches, the cars, the status, while missing the substance of the man who raised him. Money is a magnifying glass. It does not change people. It merely reveals who they truly are. Tyrell and Brittany revealed themselves to be empty vessels willing to trade a human life for a zip code. I lost a son that day, but I regained my dignity. Never set yourself on fire to keep someone else warm, especially when they are the ones holding the match. If you believe that respect must be earned and not inherited, hit that like button and subscribe. And tell me in the comments, would you have given them a second chance, or did they get exactly what they deserved?